This podcast contains adult language and stories of true crime. If you don't like laughing, crying, or being horrified at the actions of other humans, this podcast is not for you.
Ready.
Okay.
Welcome to episode 23.
Yeah, welcome.
We're feeling refreshed because we're back from a considerable break.
Yeah.
Yes.
But to you guys, it's just episode 23.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it to you, but we took a month off.
And it was a dream.
For some of us more than others.
Yes.
As some of us were
Abroad.
vacation.
I truly took it off, and Carlin and Allison were still working while I was gone. But we didn't record anything. And now they're getting me caught up on all the things I missed.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
All the pod biz. So, if this is your first time listening to us, Resolved Mysteries is a podcast where we rewatch episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, and you can watch along with us on Amazon Prime, YouTube, Tubi, and Pluto TV. And our episode numbers correspond with the ones on there. So, this is season 1, episode 23. There are 24 episodes in season 1. We are almost done with our first season.
Which is crazy.
It doesn't seem like we've done that many episodes. And then to other pods, 23 episodes probably doesn't seem like a lot at all.
Keep in mind, our episodes are like 3 episodes worth,
Truly.
if not 4 or 5.
We should have strategized this a little bit better if we were going for like downloading content.
And work and resentment and friendship and all that.
Yeah, all of the things.
Yeah, just
Sorry about
a few
that.
oversights.
And then we each research a case or two and provide you with updates. So you can watch along with us, but you also totally don't have to. To see photos we reference in the episode, follow us on Instagram at @re_solved mysteries and on Facebook and Twitter at Resolve the Pod. You can contact us at resolvedmysteriespodcast.com or at our P.O. Box 14005, Portland, Oregon 97293. We just checked our box and we got some mail. Thank you, listeners who sent us mail. Let's see who it is.
It's Alicia and Chelsea.
Thanks, ladies. We haven't opened it yet. We're going to open it when we're done. It's like our gift
Our gift to ourselves for
Yes.
doing our job.
for finishing. We also have merch, resolvedmysteriespod.threadless.com. And if you could, it really helps us out if you can go to iTunes and write us a review. We donate $1 for every review we receive. This month's charity for those reviews is Global Autism Project, which was suggested to us by one of our patrons, Nicole A. We're excited to be donating to them. And then related, we have a listener, Kelly Douglas Sinatra, who wrote a book, Little Brother, Big Hero. And she's a listener who wrote this book for parents, also teachers, I'm sure, who want to educate their children about children who have autism. She's the parent of a wonderful 12-year-old boy who happens to be autistic, and she has donated copies to her local school and libraries, and she's awesome, and her book is available on Amazon. So please support her and get that book.
Yeah,
it's
check it
helpful
out.
for anyone because the statistic is growing and
And it's global.
It's totally global.
Yes.
Okay, patrons to shout out. You want to shout them out?
Yeah, so thank you to our following new patrons. Zane G, which is like the coolest name ever. Zane. Hannah G, Mary H, Caroline B, Red, it's Baba's.
Awesome.
Shanti, Kristen N, Carrie O, Gabrielle, just a first name, like Cher, and Betsy R. Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thank you.
You rock.
So helpful. We're into July, and don't worry, we know everyone hated Into the Water,
Oh, shit. Yeah, they did.
our June book, so I don't even think we're recording a mini episode.
We're going
about
to
it.
just chat about like on a short stack. We can just mention real quick.
I also didn't totally love it, so you're
I
not
didn't
alone.
finish reading it.
I had high hopes.
Also, because Girl on the Train was so good.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it on the short stack.
Okay, so, but people are super excited, and so am I, about the July book, which is After the Eclipse by Sarah Perry.
Yes.
It's a memoir. I can't wait to read it. And so, if you are reading that along with us, please send us your thoughts about the book by July 31st.
Everybody that's reaching out to us loves the book.
And
Your August book.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm so excited. Yeah.
Because people are excited about that one.
But that book is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. And use the hashtag ReadSolvers and tag us at re_solve mysteries on Instagram so we can see your posts and thoughts on the books. And then, of course, you can also email us your thoughts.
Okay, what are we talking about in this episode?
Go ahead. You're
Eliza just hit me on the arm and told me to talk. So I'm doing the unexplained death of Gus Hoffman.
I'm doing, this is Eliza. What's your name?
Oh, I'm Allison.
Allison's doing Gus Hoffman. I'm Eliza. And I'm doing Mysterious Legend of Charles Ningesser and Francois Colli and their aviators that went missing.
Aren't they French?
They're French.
So that might give you an opportunity to practice your French accent. Lucky us. And then I go again. This is Allison again.
Thank you.
It's an unexplained death again, and it's Patsy Bolton Wright.
And then I have a lost love segment. Is it my first one? No, it's not my first one.
Who are you?
Who are you again?
It's just been a really long time
Who
since
are
I've
you?
had a
What's your
lost
name?
loves. Oh, I'm Carlin. And it's about, I'm not going to say a name because it's about a lot of people. It's about the SS Muskogee.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited about this one, actually.
Me too.
Yeah.
I was scared because history isn't my forte, but I liked it.
Okay.
All right, cool. Let's go.
do it.
Okay.
Okay,
Ready?
Can you tell us about
Are you ready
the
for it?
unexplained death of Gus Hoffman?
Yeah, you ready for like
The
a
saddest?
super fucking sad story?
Oh, no.
Yeah,
I know.
man.
He looked like such a baby in the picture.
He is a baby. He's a sweetie. So the first segment of episode 23 is an unexplained death, and it is the death of Gus Hoffman. In 1977, Gus Hoffman was a popular 19-year-old in San Jose, California. He was a musician and a mechanical whiz. One of his hobbies was restoring vintage motorcycles.
Which was so cool because this story is vintage already. Those were old bikes.
Yes, I know. I did a little research. Follow me. So in October of 1977, Gus bought a 1966 Harley Davidson Sportster. He spent 8 months and $4,000 restoring it to mint condition. That's
That's insane.
That is a lot of money.
yeah, girls. That's over $17,000 today.
And how old was he?
19.
Wow. So he was literally spending every penny he had.
Yeah, because initially I was like, where does somebody get that kind of scratch? But yes, come to find out that was every penny that he had.
Yeah.
That's a very expensive hobby. I mean, not more expensive than podcasting, but still. So I looked it up, and currently a 1966 Harley Davidson Sportster is worth max, if it's in perfect condition, $18,000. So he spent $17,000.
Restoring it to mint condition.
Yes, back
my
then.
Wow.
So they said that he was planning on reselling it, but I don't think that was his motivation. He was just doing it for the love of doing it.
Well, and I think he just said he was going to sell it because his parents wanted him to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, which is why it makes sense that the motorcycle would become a point of contention between Gus and his parents. Rose Hoffman, Gus's mother, says, quote, "We didn't like it at all. My husband gave him an ultimatum. He said, 'You go or the bike,'" Rose said. Quote, "I don't want you to leave, Gus. You got to do something. And neither does your dad want you to leave. So he's just afraid that something's going to happen to you. We don't want you to leave. We don't want you to have that bike." She says that Gus said, "Well, I'll just fix it up and sell it." That's what he told us.
It's really sad because clearly, if he hadn't had the bike, maybe something wouldn't have happened to him. But also, at least he's staying busy doing something productive and not
Totally.
wasting his life and dinking around with dinkies. And
Yeah. I
He
mean,
was like using his brain all. Yeah.
yeah. And by all accounts, he was a really good kid.
Yeah.
Like a really good kid.
sad.
And again, he was only 19 years old. I had to keep reminding myself of his age this
Yeah.
entire story, and it's so, so sad. Gus put the finishing touches on his motorcycle on July 4th, 1978. He showed it off to his brother, who in the reenactment looks super proud of him. He's all like giving a small
that was
smile, and it's super sweet. And Gus told his brother he was taking the bike out for a short ride because he was going to sell it. So he kind of wanted the glory of just tooling around in it. And that is the last time his family would ever see him. Stack says when Gus did not return home, Rose Hoffman called the police to report her son missing. Of course, the police said she had to wait 48 hours, which was the stupid standard in 1978, especially because he was over the age of 18.
So stupid.
Rose decided to investigate on her own, and so began a 10-year quest.
Oh my God, I love her.
I know. Any one of us would be lucky to have Rose Hoffman as a mother. Rose Hoffman never stopped trying to find out what had happened to her son. Stack tells us that Rose has asked that an actress play her in these most painful moments. And good for you, Rose. It's about time someone's like, You have the money. Pay somebody to relive the worst fucking moments of my life.
Yeah, I wondered if that's how it was or if they were finally at a point where they were like, okay, we'll give you the option. Like, we have the budget now.
Yeah, I don't know. But having, especially knowing everything she went through, having her recreate all of that would have been impossibly cruel. Yeah. I mean, it really would have been. So whether or not she asked them or they offered, I'm sure she asked them. I doubt that they offered to spend the money. So when Gus didn't return, Rose canvassed the neighborhood in Z Cavaricci's obs, because that's that time. That's what we're dealing with here. Z Cavaricci's everywhere.
What is that?
What?
You don't know what Z Cavaricci's are? I'm so much
I don't
older.
even know what you're saying right now.
Okay, Z Cavaricci's were those pants that AC Slater would wear in Saved by the Bell.
Yes, girl.
That like
Acid wash.
they had but they were also sort of like MC Hammer pants, but they were a little higher and they were high waisted, and then they had buttons that would overlap in front. I mean, they were very they weren't always like that, but they were a fairly complicated device. They were very popular when I was in grammar school. So that's what his mom is wearing while she's canvassing, or the actress portraying his mom. She's in Z Cavaricci's. I'm sure they're not around anymore. But if they are, send me a pair. That would be amazing. Okay, so in the reenactment, they show her going to a gas station, and Rose apparently had questioned one of his friends who worked at this gas station. He said that he hadn't seen Gus that day, but he did see him 2 days prior on his motorcycle riding by Meridian. There were two other guys who were on, quote, choppers, and a blue Monte Carlo behind Gus. The gas station attendant said the reason why he recognized them was because the men on the motorcycles had come into the gas station previously and were real mean to him, so he remembered them. Rose said they had real long hair and they were, quote, real tough guys that you don't fool around with. Stack tells us that a second witness later said that two bikers stopped Gus and they were arguing with him and, quote, threatened him with chains.
With chains.
Horrifying.
Oh my God. In the reenactment, one of the bikers takes off this huge silver chain and starts whirling it around. And I can't believe that I forgot that chains were a trope. They were like a thing back in the 70s and 80s. Wrestlers carried them. I remember in a Friday the 13th movie, Jason Voorhees kills people with chains for a little while.
I mean, see that anymore.
Because we just shoot each other now. We have
It's not efficient.
we have a lot of access to guns, so we're, but it was a big thing. And it came from, quote, outlaw bikers. All of these terms are so dated. I don't have the proper nomenclature. I clearly am not involved in the scene. But they would carry chains with them because they were constantly fixing these old bikes on the road. So they did actually use chains to intimidate people, and they did use chains as weapons. And that's where it comes from, is like needing these chains. However, the chain in the reenactment
It's huge.
It's huge.
It's huge.
So I don't know what you would do other than tow a motorcycle
Exactly.
Maybe.
with a chain like that. And then I, of course, doing my due diligence, was trying to figure out if a chain is a good weapon, just in case, like, do I need a chain? Do we need chains?
The heaviest weapons.
Okay, well, so according to Quorum commenter Caesar, quote, a chain isn't ideal. So if you're in a hardware store buying a blunt object to use as a weapon, go for the hammers and wrenches and bats. Is there anything that the people on the internet don't know?
No, they know
Damn.
it all.
Amazing.
I was just going to say, I picture us here in your basement with the generator and the canned soup and chains.
Yeah, don't fuck with me because I got my chains and my throwing knives and my bow and arrow. Don't worry about it. I got us covered end of days.
We'll die really fast. We'll be so cool.
Yeah. We're going to be weaponized and dead within seconds because nobody has a gun. Anyway, the biker starts whirling this chain around and he's yelling something. And the closed caption says, quote, I'm going to shred your inaudible. And that is the name of your sex tape.
Oh, that's so good.
I was like, I need to. How do I? Yeah,
I didn't have the captions on for that
great.
one. You got to screenshot just that.
Oh, I did. Okay. So this is not a funny segment, but there's a ton of funny shit happening in the reenactment.
We have to
That's
find
not
a little
intentionally
humor.
funny. Yeah, we have to. Otherwise, we will seriously weed through this. Yeah. Okay, so Gus drives off. Two motorcycles and a blue Monte Carlo roar after him in pursuit. Two witnesses identified one of the bikers as Michael Hodges, a member of the Forgotten Few motorcycle gang. His mugshot is fucking epic and effective because I am terrified of him.
Scary.
Yes. The other biker was ID'd as Michael Stevenson, another member of the gang. He looks less threatening. He kind of looks like he's in the band Chicago or Boston or one of those bands named after a location that were really popular for a while. But Sergeant Jeff I believe his last name is pronounced Ouimet. It's Ouimet. So Sergeant Jeff Ouimet of the Homicide Division in the San Jose PD tells us, quote, if there was ever a person you could say was a career criminal, his name would be Michael Stevenson. He's probably the most violent person I have ever investigated.
Oh my God.
Yikes.
Clearly by the chains.
Oh my God. Also, don't judge a book by its cover. I thought the other guy was going to be the maniac.
Yeah.
Stevenson is fucking crazy, and he's a monster. Stack tells us the San Jose PD didn't have enough evidence to bring in Hodges and Stevenson for an interrogation. Really, I mean, two bikers, one a career criminal. They're seen arguing with a teenager in public. Then they're seen chasing the teenager. And then the teenager goes missing. And that doesn't even warrant...
You don't even need to have any evidence for questioning.
Yeah.
You can question anybody.
I don't know if these guys were so violent that they didn't want to approach them and have them attack.
Probably.
Yeah, maybe.
Retaliate, or if they were worried that if they did, they would go into hiding. They would just take off.
Right.
So maybe they were trying to collect enough evidence to arrest.
And clearly other people were afraid to speak on them.
Oh my gosh. So since they can't get to Hodges and Stevenson, they begin to question other gang members. And based on what I know about biker gangs, which is obviously totally limited to the Sons of Anarchy,
Best show ever.
is that no one is going to talk to the police, which is exactly what happens. It seems like everyone feared Michael Stevenson. And in the reenactment, the biker that they're interviewing says, quote, well, then arrest me or get the heck out of here. Don't have the biker say anything if you're going to make him say heck.
No. That's true.
When is the last time anyone said heck ever anywhere?
Yeah.
Dennis the Menace? It was so pathetic. So Rose Hoffman says that after the San Jose PD found out who the bikers were, they told her to expect the worst, which is so awful to say to a parent.
It's fucked up.
Yeah, like you don't have to provide false hope, but you also don't have to then send the parent into a spiral of infinite possibilities of the terrible things that could happen to their child.
Yeah.
So she said, quote, I got very angry. My husband got angry, and we said, no, this can't happen. I wanted to go after them after that. I mean, that's all I thought about was going after them. Rose Hoffman is a fucking badass.
It's just so frustrating. Like when you think about anything bad happening to you, you just assume that the people in charge, quote unquote, will do something, will be able to help you, will do their jobs, and like they're afraid of the gang. It's horrible.
And they're dealing with people who are afraid, and it's basically just a wall of silence. So in order to turn up leads for the police, Rose and a friend, Carol Jensen, went undercover to infiltrate motorcycle gang hangouts.
Queens.
Are you kidding me? This is bananas.
And horrifying. That must have been so scary.
I mean,
That's the biggest thing to me is like that was literally the world she was so scared of.
Yes.
And she had to go into it.
And act well enough to be believable, to act like she's been in that world for a long time.
and these women are upper middle class, California, San Jose upper middle class.
ladies.
They are pretty wealthy, even back then. They couldn't be more removed from this.
And her friend that went with
I know.
her.
So Rose says, quote, I tried to dress like a biker person, a woman that's been around the biker world. I wore my hair all wild and tight pants, tight jeans, and heels and bracelets. And I tried to look tough. It was scary, but I don't think I was afraid, or as afraid as I should have been. The reenactment shows Rose and Carol walking around a bar, showing a photo of Gus, and Rose saying, have you seen this guy? And then they cut to Carol, who says, quote, we just let it be known that I had a loaded gun. I'm like, what? Carol looks even more like old white lady than Rose does.
It was insane.
Yeah.
They're giving those Gemma vibes. Gemma Teller.
Yes, seriously, right? Yeah.
Which, how would you do that if you've never been in that world?
Well, we'll get to it. Like, they weren't necessarily that convincing. She then says that the gun wasn't really loaded, but they let them believe it was, and that she would use it at any moment to protect Rose, which, like, these women are goals for so many things. So Sergeant Jack Baxter of San Jose PD says, quote, Rose Hoffman spent hundreds of hours going to biker bars, different low-class establishments, soliciting information from informants, buying information when necessary. She followed up every lead, which then she shared with us. So she was just like, here's more information, here's more information. Rose and her daughters, family members, and friends covered the whole area, knocking on doors, talking to anybody whose name they were given. Like, she was dragging her teenage daughters along with her into these places.
I was surprised that the police officer even said that, because it's like, aren't you embarrassed that she's doing the work for you.
I think he was implying that
they
legally
couldn't have done that much. What she did,
Or maybe he was throwing some shade at like, well, we didn't have the money to do this undercover
Right.
thing, you know? So this poor civilian woman had to go out and do this and bring us all the leads.
Right.
Yeah.
Also throwing a little bit of shade towards
Maybe,
the
yeah.
San Jose PD.
True.
Because they initially probably didn't take it seriously, and then it escalated to this bananas scenario because this woman just was amazing
Yeah.
and would not
queen.
Yep.
Yeah, would not quit. I don't know how this hasn't become a made-for-TV movie or a
I
Lifetime
know.
movie. I couldn't find anything where the rights were purchased, but it's just a cinematic story, the lengths that a mother will go to. So Rose had hired a bunch of PIs, but one of the PIs she hired had connections to motorcycle gangs. He set up a meeting with a woman who claimed she knew it happened to Gus. The woman wouldn't let Rose see her face, but she told her that Gus was dead and that he had been tortured for 3 to 5 days. And I can't imagine having a curtain in between me and the person telling me what happened to my son and me not being able to like pull the curtain aside and
Be like, bitch, tell me
Yes.
everything you know.
and also I'm dragging you by your hair to the fucking police. You know?
Honestly.
At the same time, like, you don't want to turn her off from telling you anything else. So
Or helping anybody ever again because she's fucking dead.
Yeah, I mean, and the PI in the reenactment does protect her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put this clip in, I think, because it's like very
It's
upsetting.
heartbreaking.
But I'm going to read it to you guys.
And I begged her. I said, please, tell me who did it. You got to talk to the police. You got to talk to the police. I begged her. I offered her money. I said, I'll give you anything you want, anything. Please talk to the police and tell them. And anyway, the investigator, he just said no, there's no way he could let her talk. He said he just wanted her to let me know what happened to my son. And I begged him too. And he said, I can't. He said, I don't want to be responsible for her death.
My heart is
crazy.
breaking for this woman.
And shows how serious that gang is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And like, so here you are walking around with the truth of what happened to your son, and there's nothing that you can do about it.
Even the PI knows.
Yep. Yep.
It would not be okay.
What else bothered me so much is that this was just a good kid.
Yep.
He wasn't
why
somebody
did
that,
they- ugh.
not that anyone deserves to be tortured for days, but
Well,
like,
that's what's truly
there
like,
was nothing.
yeah, that is something that we're going to continue talking about, because the thing that's most upsetting, I think, is that this is just chaos. This is
Yeah.
like an upsetting event because none of it makes any
Yeah.
sense, because it was totally random, because it was a confluence of events that happened that made this horrible, horrible thing occur, you know? And that's something that's really unnerving and upsetting for everybody, not even if you're a parent, just for anybody, that this could happen. So Rose, she uses the word enticed, but I think she means sort of intimidated. She thinks that they enticed him to look at the bike. So she thinks the guys were like, let me see your bike, let me see your bike. And that Gus was intimidated and nervous so that he got off the bike. And she said, she thinks once Gus got off the bike, that was it. She thinks they wheeled the bike into the garage and then they walked him into the garage. And when the garage door went down, he was never seen again. So mind you, while she's giving this interview, she knows everything that happened to him.
Yeah.
Like everything. And she manages to contain her composure and describe it in a way that isn't upsetting to the people that are listening
Wait,
and
how
watching.
does she know?
Because the informant saw everything.
They told her the details?
Yeah.
Oh my
Oh,
god.
so they told her more than
I'll,
what?
I'll get to it. But yeah, like, so she has a ton of graphic information.
Oh no, I'm scared.
Yeah. So Stack tells us that on June 19th, 1986, Michael Stevenson was killed during a failed extortion attempt. His death provided an unexpected break in the Hoffman case. With Stevenson dead, police re-questioned members of the biker gangs and other possible witnesses. Now that Stevenson was no longer a threat, they talked and they named names. Stevenson was a fucking animal. And the fact that he could keep such a large group of people who also had violent records quiet says something about his behavior and what he did to people.
Oh, yeah.
So Sergeant Weemay tells us that it appears that Gus Hoffman was forced through intimidation to go to Mike Stevenson's residence, forced to go into the garage. There were certain acts of violence against Gus that resulted in his death and the disappearance of his motorcycle. Police immediately arrested Michael Hodges, and the other men witnesses ID'd. Richard Dollar, a friend of Hodges, was picked up in San Quentin, where he was already serving time for parole violation. And the third remaining suspect, John Stell, was captured in Northern California. He was carrying a loaded handgun, but he had other warrants out for his arrest. He was essentially on the run. At this point, the body of Gus Hoffman has never been found. Rose Hoffman wants to give her son the dignity and death that he was denied at the end of his life. She hopes viewers can help. Quote, if anybody knows where my son is, please, I beg you, please call the police or call me. I want my son, and that's the most important thing. The show's update tells us that Hodges, Dollar, and Stell were convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison, and that Hodges and Stell both died in prison. So the show did a fairly succinct job of letting us know what happened.
As they will.
Yeah. No, they actually did. I mean, I don't have much to add. I just have some kind of fill-in information.
Yeah.
But essentially, the 3 men were convicted of murder. 2 out of 3 died in prison. It was so long ago that there's nothing digital that I can find on how they died in prison. But I hope it was violently and really painful.
Yeah, me too. Agreed.
Yeah. So Carol Jensen, the friend who accompanied Rose Hoffman on her expeditions into the underworld, said, quote, the only thing that saved her, the scum of the earth, the slime balls, they recognized that Rose had absolutely no fear. I've never seen anything like it. Jensen said, I'd say, dear God, protect us, because I don't know what she's going to do next.
Oh my gosh. And she's just such a good friend, just going along with her.
Yep. Quote, Rose has a very sweet, loving, and compassionate nature to her, Carol said. But apparently it wasn't her warmth that kept the bikers from harming her. Quote, some thought we were so crazy that they wouldn't do anything to us, Jensen said. Also, Rose let it be known that she carried a loaded gun wherever she went. She made it clear that if she went down, they'd all go down with her. So I don't know why in the UM segment, Carol said that she was carrying the gun. I don't know.
Maybe that was just like the first time they went out or something.
Maybe, yeah. But I was like, that's interesting. Like, is that pulling a little bit of vigilantism away from Rose to make her more sympathetic? Like, I thought it was an interesting change.
Yeah.
And then Rose Hoffman says, I did have a little gun, but it was never loaded. Ugh. Badass. So, of course, out of desperation, Rose went to psychics for help. These garbage people who take money, give false hope, they're bottom feeders. It's psychological abuse of the highest order. One psychic told her in repeated visits that her son was living in Utah. She said he, quote, got involved in something he couldn't get out of and that he had an emotional breakdown, Hoffman recalled, shaking her head in disgust.
That's awful.
Another assured her that her son was alive. Then, after meeting with one of several private investigators Hoffman had hired over the years, the psychic had a new vision. She told Hoffman that her son had been, quote, unmercifully beaten and killed. Oh my God. I don't know how doing that is not illegal.
I know.
Because it should be. So the first PI that Rose had hired, the one who had the connections, he had kind of stopped working for her for a bit. And then all of a sudden he called her in 1980 or 81 to say he had found a young woman who knew about Gus Hoffman's murder. But before putting them in touch with the woman, the PI told the Hoffmans, quote, the horrendous story, the unbelievable nightmare. The Hoffman's oldest daughter, her last name is Simino, and I didn't write down her first name. I apologize. She remembers the drive home after hearing the investigator's account. Quote, I was afraid my dad was going to have a heart attack. They were as close to hysterical as you can get. Later, I'd go through months and months of nightmares.
Oh, God.
When the investigator set up a meeting with the alleged witness, Gus Sr. couldn't bear to hear the story again. So it was Rose alone who climbed into the back of a camper. I did some research on Michael Stevenson because who was this guy? He was arrested in 1976 for the alleged kidnapping of a teenage girl. And again in 1977 after a 20-year-old woman alleged he beat her, then kept her chained and handcuffed in a closet, forcing her to take drugs. And I think he had done that for a month or longer.
Oh my God.
Then Stevenson was convicted in 1981 of sexually assaulting and killing a Modesto man who owed him money. Several witnesses said that he fancied himself a, quote, Charles Manson-type leader.
Oh, God.
They said that his standard fundraising technique was extortion. Quote, what eventually led to his killing was the same kind of deal, Wime said. Quote, he was trying to extort some property or money from an elderly person, and it resulted in him being shot and killed. The police didn't even file a complaint in that case. They said it was a justifiable killing. In all the interviews we did, we only found one person who was sorry to hear he was dead, and that was his wife, his widow. Even some of his so-called friends said it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. So the police were basically like, bye. They didn't investigate the murder. The guy said it was self-defense. He was trying to extort me, and they were like, okay.
So he had killed someone in 1981, and he was out of jail by the time that this happened.
I guess so.
Hoffman. So he did 6 years in jail, maybe?
Oh, yeah, which I think at
If
that
that.
time, that was like right when California was becoming way more strict in sentencing. Like California now is fairly strict. They have this three-strike law,
weren't
but
then.
they weren't then. No.
Yeah.
The three-strikes law didn't come into play, I think, until Clinton was in office. And at this point, we're still like barely Reagan years. So Rose said, quote, "My son was a very gullible young kid. He helped a lot of people in his life. He had a heart of gold, and the bike was the reason he was killed. He spent almost all his money on that bike. He only had it running for 3 weeks, and then he was missing." A key witness for the prosecution was the ex-wife of suspect Richard Morris Dollar, who said she witnessed the attack. Deputy District Attorney Don Shearer said the woman, whose name is still withheld, had kept silent for years for fear of retribution from Michael Stevenson and the legal system. Shearer said that none of the slated witnesses claimed to have seen Hoffman killed, but at least one swore he saw the 4 men sodomize Hoffman and force him to orally copulate them at a house in San Jose. So this 19-year-old kid was sexually assaulted and tortured for almost a week for a fucking motorcycle.
And then they haven't found the motorcycle, so they don't even know if the gang even used it.
Based on the testimony of witnesses, investigators believe that Gus's body was dismembered in Michael Stevenson's garage, placed in trash bags, and taken to an unknown location. His motorcycle, which authorities believe was sold to a chop shop by the murderers in order to disassociate themselves from the crime and to make money, was never found, nor was Gus Hoffman's body. Rose Hoffman passed away in 2011, and she was 99 years old.
Whoa.
And that's the story of Gus and Rose Hoffman.
That's awful.
Wow.
Yeah. It's just like,
Yeah, that was my first thought when they were like, when the reenactment of them following him, I was like, they just want his fucking bike. He's an innocent
so
kid.
they couldn't have just knocked him off the bike and taken the fucking bike?
Yeah.
It's because
had
this
to-
guy Stevenson was a fucking
Yeah,
I think
a
he had to
sexual
show his
predator,
power. Yeah.
It's
a
just-
serial killer, and a
Yeah.
maniac.
Yep.
They couldn't just take the bike.
Yeah.
They couldn't knock the kid off the bike, take the bike, and let the kid walk away.
Because it wasn't about that. He wanted
Yeah.
to be.
I mean, it's
total
disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting.
So sad.
Yeah. I had no idea, like, going into this, I assumed that they just killed him and took the bike. I didn't realize that he
Torture.
was sexually assaulted and tortured for days. And, like, based on all the accounts I read, there's no way that he fought back. So I think the entire time he probably was just hoping that they were going to let him go.
Yeah.
You know?
It's crazy too because his parents didn't want him to have the bike, and of course motorcycles are dangerous. But they seem to have a very strong feeling about it, almost like
Yeah.
they knew something bad was going to happen.
Yeah.
And the thing they thought is not what happened, like a terrible crash or something. But it just seems like it was doomed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really sad story.
It's really sad. Well, you did a good job. Yeah.
Thanks.
We'll be right back after this short break.
Hey, this is Liz,
Hey, this is Heather,
and we are Nerdy Bitches Podcast.
a show where two geeky ladies podcast their way through pop culture.
From movies and TV to our regular book club and everything in between, we bring you our favorite fandoms with a feminine eye.
We are talking Star Wars, Star Trek, DC, Marvel, comic books, and anime.
And don't forget sci-fi, fantasy, action movies, video games, D&D, board games, and so much more.
Be sure to check us out on Apple Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, or wherever you find awesome podcasts.
You can also find us hanging out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and at nerdybitches.com.
See you soon.
I am Sunny Hepburn,
And I'm Brandy Fleeks.
and we host Book of Lies, the podcast. So we talk about crooks and criminals,
Liars and fraudsters,
fakers, phonies, and people that scam.
and those that steal your grandma's money.
Yeah. Save her from her getting her money stolen. Anyway, so we release a new episode every Tuesday.
Look for us on Tuesday.
On Tuesday, wherever you guys get your podcasts. So iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher,
And any other podcast hosting service that you might use.
So check us out, Book of Lies Podcast. Again, I am Sunny Hepburn.
And I'm Brandy Fleeks.
We host
Book of Lies,
the podcast.
Hey everybody, we know you already like listening to Resolve Mysteries, but did you know that you can get paid while you listen to us and some of your other favorite pods? There is a free new app called Podcoin, and it pays you in Podcoins to listen to podcasts. Here's how it works. Find your favorite podcasts or check out new ones, listen to podcasts, and earn Podcoin while you listen. Then you exchange the Podcoin for gift cards at places like Amazon or Starbucks, or if you choose, you can donate the Podcoin to a nonprofit. So download the app on an iPhone or Android, use our special code MYSTERIES, and you'll get 300 Podcoin just for signing up. I use it to listen to the pods I already like The Shrink Next Door and Getting Curious, but I've also discovered a lot of other podcasts on there too. There are over 500,000 on there, so you'll definitely find something new. Download the Podcoin app on your mobile device, use our code MYSTERIES for 300 Podcoin, and get a reward for something you're doing anyway, binging on podcasts.
So this is the second segment in episode 23 and is a mysterious legend, and it is the story of the disappearance of the French biplane called the L'Oiseau Blanc, or the White Bird. In May of 1927, Charles Nungesser and Francois Colli set out to be the first men to fly nonstop across the Atlantic from Paris to New York City, planning to land their watertight plane in New York Harbor, which I thought was a cool detail and goal.
Yeah.
So a lot of what I'm about to tell you up front is from my own research, and then I'll sort of sandwich that with the episode segment information and end with some updates from my research.
Cool.
A lot of the following is from History.com, which is the History Channel's website. I'll talk about the L'Oiseau Blanc a little bit, but just to get some information about why the men would even want to do that and some history around it. 2 weeks after the L'Oiseau Blanc took off, Charles Lindbergh, which is the name most of us know because he's the father of the Lindbergh baby. So the Lindbergh baby, his child, was captured and kidnapped in 1932. But the reason why Charles Lindbergh was even famous is because he actually did become the first man to fly across the Atlantic in 1927. So he flew from New York to Paris and landed successfully. And many like him, Nungesser and Colli included, were making the dangerous attempt because in 1919, a French-American hotel mogul named Raymond Ortigue offered a $25,000 reward to the first aviator to make the nonstop flight.
Whoa.
Either from New York to Paris or Paris to New York.
Crazy.
And I think
You got it.
there are people who have money to give away, obviously, but they're also wanting to advance things.
Yeah.
Like, if the first biplane can do it, then eventually passengers can do it.
Oh, for
and
sure.
That would make travel so much easier.
Yeah.
So British pilots John Alcock and Arthur Brown made a nonstop transatlantic flight from Newfoundland to Ireland that same year, but that, of course, wasn't the same distance, but they're just trying it out. And Ortigue's money remained unclaimed until the mid-1920s when several different teams stepped up to the challenge. So you can watch these videos of these prop planes taking off. It is so wild. Someone actually has to start the prop with the big pole thing.
It's crazy.
And then they're taking off. It's so bumpy. It looks like they're going to crash at any moment. And it's just so dangerous. They honestly could have crashed.
And then they went across the GD Ocean. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the planes are so small.
I know.
They're in there for
And
a
made
day.
of wood and fabric.
And they're exposed to the elements.
Seriously,
God.
how does it even work? I was just on a double-decker plane, 2 stories, and I don't understand how that works. And I also don't understand how these little planes worked. I don't understand.
It's insane.
If I
Physics
think
is
about
awful.
it too much, I will have a panic attack, especially when I'm on the plane for 10 hours. Charles Lindbergh's 3,600-mile flight flight vaulted him to international fame, but some say it's possible that Nungesser and Coley did make the flight and maybe they were the first, but it's unknown where they landed or crashed, so it can't be proven. Charles Nungesser had lived a swashbuckling life that included stints as a gaucho in Argentina and a Hollywood stunt pilot. Francois Coley, meanwhile, had achieved several endurance flying records over the Mediterranean. Both men had also served as French fighter pilots during World War I.
Which one has the eye patch?
Coley.
The swashbuckler?
Coley, surprisingly.
Wow.
You would think.
And he had an eye patch as a result of a crash that had left him partially blind.
Wow.
And Nungesser had survived 17 war wounds and endured so many surgeries that the New York Times described him as part platinum.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Robot man.
So, unlike most of the Ortigue Prize challengers, the Frenchmen planned to begin their crossing in Paris and end in New York. Most came from the States to Europe, or tried, or North America, I guess, with those British men starting in Newfoundland. With Nungesser serving as pilot and Coley as navigator, they would fly their open cockpit biplane over England, Ireland, and the Atlantic before flying over Newfoundland and Nova Scotia and down to New York.
How long
God.
was that supposed to take back then?
Like a day.
Oh.
Just a day?
I'm surprised.
Because I was like,
Still.
where do you put your snacks?
Where do you put your snacks? It's not cozy. It's
like-
really cold.
It's got to be cold and wet.
Maybe not horribly cold because they cannot go
That's
high.
true. They can't go as high.
They can't go
Yeah.
anywhere near as high as like
Oh,
a
so yeah, they're
commercial
flying
jet
at
now.
like a weird low altitude, which also then causes a lot of problems with drag and stuff, right? The lower you are, the
Right.
more stress it puts on
It's
the plane.
Yeah, because
Man.
the air is not as thin or
Yeah,
whatever.
it's crazy.
I don't know. It's so crazy. But yeah, they didn't have any pressurization. It's open.
Yeah, it's just open.
anyway. But then
just
they also don't
open.
have pressurization, so they can't go up too high.
Fuck
It's fucking
that.
crazy.
I mean,
Can you
I was out
imagine
at no
how-
snacks.
That's where you draw the line.
I mean, I won't even camp. I am not getting in one of those fucking things.
You're not.
So they would then finish in grand style by making a water landing in New York near the Statue of Liberty or Battery Park. The L'Oiseau Blanc
tight.
had been modified
Picturesque.
to carry over 1,000 gallons of fuel, enough for over 40 hours in the air. And it was outfitted with a watertight bottom and detachable landing gear that would allow the pilots to cut down on weight.
Cool.
Yeah. And then as a good luck charm, Nungesser had the plane emblazoned with his World War I flying emblem, which was a black heart with a skull and crossbones. It's very
That picture
badass.
is so good.
We're going to post it. It's a dream.
I want it up in the pod room.
Yeah.
I love it. I also like the picture of just Coley with his eye patch and his cigar. I want
Yes.
just that.
All the
framed,
imagery.
too. Okay, so early on May 8th, 1927, Nungesser and Coley climbed into the cockpit of L'Oiseau Blanc at Paris's La Bourget field. The threat of foul weather in the Atlantic had deterred Charles Lindbergh and other Ortigue competitors from taking off so early in the month. So that's why Charles Lindbergh waited till later in May. But the Frenchmen were willing to take the chance in hopes of winning the race. The aviators waved goodbye to supporters, Coley receiving a tearful goodbye kiss from his wife. He had promised her this would be his last long flight attempt.
Honey, they always do.
I know. So at 5:17 a.m., as a sea of spectators looked on, L'Oiseau Blanc chugged down the runway and took to the sky. A New York Times quote said, "The crowd stood spellbound, hats in hands, as the beautiful machine disappeared into the mists of early day." So, official reports last sighted the plane over Southern Ireland around 10:30 a.m. that morning, at which point they flew off into the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean.
It's fucking crazy.
It's crazy.
Crazy.
No radio contact or...
L'Oiseau Blanc was not outfitted with a radio, so for the next day, the world could only wait for it to reappear over North America.
That's bananas.
But then by the afternoon of May 9th, which is when they were expected, thousands of people had gathered in Manhattan to wait for the plane. When the time came and went with no sign of Nungesser and Coley, search planes were dispatched to scout for them along the American coast. Back in France, one newspaper published and distributed an evening edition that read, quote, "The Atlantic is conquered," reporting that Nungesser and Coley had arrived safely in New York.
No. What? Their families.
Yeah, but then telegraph messages soon came in confirming that the L'Oiseau Blanc was missing.
Oh, that's terrible.
I know. They clearly wanted to be like the first to break the story. But it was
That's
the
like
wrong
Dewey
choice.
defeats Truman. That like
So sad. Oh,
famous
yeah.
photo.
So over the next several days, Nungesser and Coley became the subject of an international rescue operation. Ships and aircraft from the U.S., Canada, and France scoured the North American coastline in search of a sign that the plane had crashed in the sea or on land. Floyd Bennett, an American Orteig Prize competitor who had been injured when his plane crashed on takeoff, like they would do that often.
Yeah.
And it's not hard to believe when you watch it. The wings are like almost hitting the ground. It's so bumpy. It's so like jostly. I could never. I don't know how they do that. They're like adrenaline junkies, right?
Yes,
They have to be.
Yes.
It's like skydiving.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
for a day. For a full day.
Scarier.
Over the fucking ocean for 40 hours.
Yes. But even he came out to he was injured and he came out of the hospital to lead an airborne search for the men.
I mean, there must have been a ton of solidarity, even though they were competing
Yes.
against each other. They
Yes.
all must have been like, okay, this shit is real.
Yes.
You know?
Among the pilots and then also just among the countries too, which is really
Yeah.
impressive. So by the time Charles Lindbergh crossed the coast of France on the last leg of his journey, he followed the Seine River to Paris. He touched down at Le Bourget Field at 10:22 p.m. and this is on May 21st. So a few weeks after, people have been searching for the men. And of course, the men were French. He lands in Paris, and still there's a crowd waiting for him of 100,000
man.
wanting to cheer him on, even though they're in mourning for their French aviators.
Wow.
And he said, quote, "I saw there was danger of killing people because they rushed the plane in excitement. And I didn't want to kill, like, he was afraid he'd kill them with his propeller, so he quickly came to a stop."
Well, because they probably have
don't
never
know
been
how
near a
it
plane
works. They just
before.
don't know. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I know.
It's crazy.
Can you imagine? That'd be so terrible.
No.
Lindbergh became an instant hero both internationally and at home. So then we're kind of into the episode now and the research that some people have done or just different people who think that they heard the plane. So 50 years after the L'Oiseau Blanc went missing, in 1971, a hunter named Jim Reed was deep in the Maine woods when he found a moss-covered aircraft engine. He was an auto mechanic, and so he was totally sure it was not an engine from a car, but had to be from an aircraft. But then
He lost it.
he lost it. Jim was unable to retrace his
You don't
steps
put, like,
to
a-
take anyone back there, and
You
it's
don't-
never been found
You
again.
don't put your hat on top of it?
anything.
Yeah, or like leave a trail of something.
Like,
Come on.
I wrote, "Come on, Jim." JFC.
Fucking medium important here, buddy.
Yeah.
I know.
So, I mean, he's the only one that's ever seen that. So who knows if that's true. And it might not even be from, of course, the plane. but-
Right.
Okay, so then enter Rick Gillespie and his wife, Pat Thrasher. Since 1985, so when this episode aired, 4 years, they had been searching for the missing plane. They both when the episode aired, were convinced that the plane did indeed make its way across the Atlantic before crashing near Machias, Maine, or Machias. The couple used a helicopter equipped with an infrared scanner to search the area where Jim believed he had found the engine. They're having to, Jim, come on. They're having to use a helicopter to find what you lost.
With brand new technology.
Jeez. Yeah, he's like, Rick Gillespie's like, it's not going to be technology. It's always people. It's people that find it. He's
He
He
was.
was dramatic.
Yes.
Yes.
He needed it.
He needed it. So Rick and Pat then focused their efforts on questioning long-term Maine residents who were alive in 1927, which is interesting because there's not many, even at that time. So a retired blueberry farmer, Harold Vining, had lived in the area for 77 years.
He was a sweetie.
He's a sweetie. He's one of the last people still alive he was one of the last people alive who claimed to have heard the plane as it flew over Maine before crashing. Harold claims that on May 9th, 1927, he was outside chopping wood when he heard a plane flying over him. Quote, "At that time, we was all keyed up listening for Lindbergh. Due to the fact that this plane was traveling in the wrong direction, it could not have been Lindbergh. I honestly believe this was the first plane I ever heard in my life. That's why it's so outstanding in my mind.
Yeah.
Unquote.
I'm glad he said that because it didn't occur to me at
Me
first. I was
either.
like, okay, you
And
remember a plane.
I'm like, oh, you saw a plane
Yeah,
over?
you remember a fucking plane. Of course. Never
And
seen one
they
before.
didn't say this in the episode, but that's the luxury, though, of not having World War I on within your country.
Right.
Like, people in Europe had heard planes.
Right.
They probably hadn't been close to them, but they had heard them.
Oh, shit. I didn't even think about that.
Americans who were not in the war hadn't.
Oh, wow.
But, because they were, they
used
said,
them. They used them in World War I. They had planes.
Coley and Noongusser were both fighter pilots.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
But yeah, so then all these people too. 3 miles away, a young couple named Everett and Abigail Scott were driving home when they heard a plane flying above them. It was so new that they stopped their car to listen. They got out of the car and listened for it. Then 2 miles away, Mary Gould was in her kitchen when she too heard the plane. Anson Berry was fishing that day when he also heard a plane flying over. He then heard, so this is interesting because no one else heard this part. Anson Berry says that he heard the plane's engine stop and then the sound of the plane crashing, although he was unable to locate the crash site. Like, you would see fire.
Dude. Yeah. And
Right?
also, he wouldn't have been the only person to hear that. Even with a small prop plane, it must be so loud.
Yeah.
When
yeah,
a
in the
plane
reenactment,
crashes.
the sound they made was not loud enough, I didn't think.
Yeah.
Anson, I don't think was alive anymore at the time of the episode, but his cousin Maurice is the one who tells the story. And Maurice says he remembers that it was very foggy that day, so it was impossible for any of the witnesses to actually see the plane. They could just hear it.
I thought that was interesting.
And then along with these witnesses, there were also people in Nova Scotia who believed that they heard and had even seen the plane flying above them that day, which would have been the path that the men would have been trying to take above Nova Scotia. So in 1985, Rick and Pat and their team searched the area where Anson Berry believed the plane had crashed. While there, they found a unique piece of wood that was used for padding purposes. According to Rick, the piece of wood was not manufactured in North America, but he doesn't say how he knows that.
Allison's skeptical.
Eventually, the team found 23 more fragments, Allison, in the same strip of wood. Didn't you see them lining
They went
it up?
together. They showed it.
It's like a puzzle. Come on.
I don't do puzzles.
Yeah, that's right. Together, they formed the length of 2 meters, which is the exact width of the missing plane's wing. And that's sort of where the segment stops. So, it's still unsolved. We still haven't found it. The most important eyewitness, or the one that they were able to talk to in person, was Harold Vining, and he passed away in 1990. Technical French analysis theorizes that the pilots ran out of fuel and were forced to crash the plane, proving that they had crossed the Atlantic between May 8th and May 9th. So, they might have been the first ones to cross it. They wouldn't have won the money because they didn't do the Paris to exactly New York thing, but still they set the record for a nonstop.
I hope they made it.
Yeah.
I just feel like there would be more physical evidence than 23 pieces of wood. And
Unless it's out in the middle of fucking nowhere.
At the middle of nowhere? Yeah.
Nova Scotia nowhere?
I know.
That's nowhere.
That's really nowhere.
I don't know anything about Nova Scotia.
Oh, I want to go there. It looks so beautiful.
Yeah.
So, researchers have revealed that during a 3-month span, 30 ships were ordered to search for pieces of the wreck floating between Boston and St. Pierre, and suspected pieces were found.
That's so interesting that plane wreckage would have floated then.
Oh, right, because it sinks immediately now, doesn't it?
Would.
Unless you're Sully. And then it hangs out.
He did it.
I know. He made the first water landing. I mean,
although that was Hudson Bay, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. So they don't know, I think, if those were pieces of the plane. It's never been proven. So recently, Rick Gillespie has changed his theory about the plane.
What?
Oh, yes. He's still alive and he's still working on it. Gillespie's in. So he now believes that it crash landed somewhere in Newfoundland. Several witnesses reported seeing a plane flying in the area at the time. According to Gillespie, the sightings corresponded with the plane's flight path. In a pond in Newfoundland, he located a piece of metal that matched the color of the plane. I'm shaking my head.
They both just got so mad.
However,
blonde girl's mad on this side.
However, it could not be positively identified as coming from the plane.
He's just thirsty. He's like, look at this. Look at this.
So
It's white.
plain thirsty.
Don't you know the plane was white? It was called the White Bird. So for the last 4 years, members of an organization called La Recherche de l'Oiseau Blanc have been searching for remnants of the ill-fated plane in a specific location, the waters around the remote tiny island of St. Pierre, which was mentioned before.
Okay.
They feel like they've really narrowed it down, but I don't know.
Where's St. Pierre? Sorry.
Off of Newfoundland.
Okay.
According to the organization's founder, Frenchman Bernard Dauquet, storms forced Nungesser and Coley to veer off course over Newfoundland and attempt a sea landing off St. Pierre in heavy fog, which would make sense because if they ran out of gas or they ran into storms, it would be better for them to land in the water because they had a watertight
I was going to say, if you have a watertight bottom, you better use it.
Yeah. That's what I always say.
Don't you have that like cross stitched on a pillow somewhere?
For sure.
I mean,
I'm doing it now.
we're just always saying that. Use your watertight bottom. I'm trying to take this very seriously, okay?
You're doing a good job.
You
despite
are.
My
We're being
disruption.
total assholes right now.
Okay. So, like I said, they had witnesses to suggest that it could have been that, and then that it could have been there. 13 people heard or saw the plane heading south along Newfoundland's eastern coast on that morning. And it's interesting because St. Pierre actually belongs to France.
Oh.
That's sad. They went so far just to land in
just
Korea.
to go home.
But yeah,
Oh, that's
I mean,
upsetting.
they've never been seen. It's fine. I mean, it's not fine, but
it's not fine.
It was a long. We need a statute of limitations on how long we have to be sad about a
That's true,
segment.
that's true.
Come on, this guy's an eye patch. Come on.
we love him. That's why we love
I
him.
know. I'm like,
Yeah.
we're celebrating him.
he was prepared for this.
He wouldn't want us to cry for him.
Oh, he wouldn't. No, you're right.
Yeah.
So something interesting, another theory. At the time of L'Oiseau Blanc's historic flight, the island, St. Pierre, was a hub for bootlegging operations during Prohibition, which lasted from 1920 to 1933 in the States.
Somebody's interest is peaked over there.
I should have mentioned this at the beginning.
Girl, lead with that.
Montreal merchants would ship liquor to the island legally, after which speedboats would shuttle it off for distribution in the northeastern United States to Allison's ancestors.
Doing the good work.
In fact, one past theory of the disappearance goes that the U.S. Coast Guard may have shot down
That's what I was gonna
Nungesser
say.
and Coley's plane by mistake, thinking they were rum runners.
Yeah, that's what I was. That's why it piqued
But
my
like,
interest.
wouldn't they? I mean, well, yeah, I guess they would
have a lot of
known.
splaining
They
to
were
do.
really
Rump
into.
runner.
They
What
were
culture?
into Lindbergh, like Vining was like we were all keyed up waiting to see Lindbergh, but maybe the U.S. media wasn't really talking about the Frenchmen coming over here as much. So, but it just seems like the U.S. Coast Guard would have known it wasn't like that. Someone was making the attempt. I don't know.
I mean, the Coast Guard was shooting planes out of the air back then. Who gave them this
Yeah.
unlimited power?
No, that's
About
true.
rum.
Seriously,
Prohibition is serious business.
it was a nightmare.
So one notable monument to the pilots was erected in 1928. So again, Europe, they do things fast. They don't wait around. I feel like monuments here would take forever. And no one would agree on what to do.
Yes, I have evidence of that in my segment.
Oh, interesting. So it went up at Paris's Le Bourget Field, which is where they took off from. And that's where Lindbergh finished his flight. And I'll post a picture of it, but it's an naked woman statue with wings. But I like what it says. It says in French, quote, "In honor of those who tried and of the one who succeeded." So it's in
that's
honor
sweet.
of Nungesser and Coley and Lindbergh, too. Like, it's really nice how supportive they were of an American who did make it when they had
Yeah.
2 of their men that died. So that's the story of a very sad airplane that went missing and the 2 men with 3 eyes.
I do have
Oh my god, that was the best.
Was the guy who was super into the wood he found and the metal he found, did he agree with the French people that started the team to find the Does he agree with the
I
location?
think that they might kind of work together.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, because they're looking in very similar areas.
Because if they were arguing, I would be like, guys.
No, yeah,
Come
I
on
don't
now.
know. I couldn't find anything that said that. They seem to be looking in the same area. And Gillespie, he's not like a dummy. He's like an aviation archaeologist.
Oh, yeah, no.
And they do it
pressure.
all together. They quit their job to look for
know.
jobs
Yeah,
to look for it. And now they've started like a foundation where they search for other airplanes too. But anyway,
Wow.
that's the story.
Cool.
Cool.
And I'm sticking to it.
Okay.
Bye.
We're not going to fight you. So here I am with 2 unexplained deaths.
All right.
All right. So, as I was just saying previously, segment 3 of episode 23 is an unexplained death, and it is the death of Patsy Bolton Wright. October 1987, Arlington, Texas. The friends and family of 43-year-old Patsy Bolton Wright mourn her tragic and unexpected death. She had died suddenly at 3 a.m. in her bedroom, and no one knows why. Leslie Wright, Patsy's daughter, said they never expected this to happen because she was, quote, so alive, so healthy, and there was nothing wrong with her. When Patsy died, they were all, quote, in awe because they would have never expected that to happen to her. Sally Horning, Patsy's sister, says there's not a day that goes by where the family can believe this happened. Everyone still expects her to walk into the room smiling. They can still hear her laugh, and Patsy's death doesn't seem real at all. Stack tells us that 8 days after the memorial service, a routine autopsy was performed. A mass spectrometer checked for 56,000 different foreign substances in Patsy's blood samples. At some point, the machine showed a violent positive reaction, and the labs ID'd the substance as strychnine. Stack tells us that because of its side effects, strychnine poisoning is considered an unusually cruel way to die. So here are some of the side effects of strychnine poisoning. I don't know the side effects of cyanide off the top of my head, but I will get back to you. Cyanide is used much more frequently. Yes. So 10 to 20 minutes after exposure, the body's muscles begin to spasm, starting with the head and neck in the form of trismus, which is a lovely, cute word for lockjaw. Oh. And then I swear to God, Rhissus sardinicus or rictus grinnis, a highly characteristic abnormal sustained spasm of the facial muscles that appears to produce grinning.
Oh, that's so freaky.
Oh, no.
It may be caused by tetanus, strychnine poisoning, or Wilson's disease, and has also been reported after judicial hangings. Don't Google it.
Oh, my God.
It's just pictures of dead people grinning.
Horror. No. Nope.
Yes, it is a nightmare.
Oh, my God.
That's why I do the work for you. I gotcha.
I want to Google it.
I know you will.
I
you
know
will.
I'm going to,
Yes,
but
sickos, I love you. So the spasms then spread to every muscle in the body with nearly continuous convulsions and get worse at the slightest stimulus. The convulsions progress, increasing in intensity and frequency until the backbone arches continually. Convulsions lead to lactic acidosis, excessive low pH in the bloodstream, hyperthermia, excessively high body temperatures, and rhabdomyolysis.
rhabdomyolysis. I talked about that in the
What was that?
the second Kurt.
The one who they found just his shoe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and he was
because of alcohol.
maybe in the basement.
He maybe died. Of alcohol.
Oh, okay. So how do you say it again? Because you said
rhabdomyolysis. I think
Okay.
it was.
Yeah, that looks right.
So rhabdomyolysis is a condition in which damaged skeletal muscle breaks down rapidly.
Yep.
So basically, your muscle turns to liquid.
Yep. And then
Gross.
toxifies your body. Basically.
Yep. Symptoms may include muscle pains, weakness, vomiting, and confusion. And there may be tea-colored urine or an irregular heartbeat. This is all implying that you are still alive.
Yeah.
Basically, death comes from asphyxiation caused by paralysis of the neural pathways that control breathing or by exhaustion, sheer exhaustion of your body from the convulsions. Wow. The subject usually takes within 2 to 3 hours to die after exposure.
Jeez.
It is truly like
awful.
a nightmare situation. So it is very, very rare.
So my question was, what is strychnine actually for?
I'll get there.
Okay.
I got you. Agatha Christie weirdly uses strychnine all of the time in her novels.
Oh, I was going to say, I feel like it's a thing I've read a
Yes.
million times, but I'm like, what actually is it? And
Agatha
why-
Christie, that queen loves strychnine. I don't even know if she knew what it did, and if she did, she's crazy. But aside from that, Stack tells us that since 1950, there's only been one confirmed case of homicide by strychnine in the entire U.S. I found one. I don't think it was the one he was talking about.
How do you even get it?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I want to know.
I got you, girls. I got you. Okay. Stack says that Texas authorities faced a puzzling question. How had this poison entered Patsy's bloodstream? 3 a.m. the morning of her death, Steve and Sally Horning receive a frantic phone call from Patsy. She was saying she couldn't breathe. She said she took some cold medicine and something was really wrong. Steve and Sally rushed over to Patsy's, but the door was locked and they couldn't get in. Steve Horning said he went around to the side of the house where the window was open. He supposed for, quote, getting fresh air in, which I think is such a weird thing to say.
Why do you even need to explain why somebody might leave their window open?
I don't know.
Unnecessary.
Oh, girls. He opened the window, crawled in, and found her. In the reenactment, it looked like there were 2 plates on a dinner tray in her bedroom, like in a hotel when they bring the food in. But I don't know.
But at her house.
Yeah. So Sally says that she looked like she had just fainted, but she wasn't responsive. Steve said that he tried working on her heart and did mouth to mouth. And during that time, a lot of green fluid came up from her, and he continually spit that out onto the bed. Ugh.
Yuck.
He says sometime after that, the medics came. The reenactment showed Steve giving her CPR in the bed, which it's not effective. You have to move someone to the floor. So I don't know how much Steve's like mouth to mouth was helping her. Sally rode to the hospital in the ambulance with Patsy, but the medics said they weren't able to save her. They'd done everything they could do. Neither Sally nor the police had any reason to suspect foul play. But in her phone call, Patsy had mentioned taking cold medicine, so police collected the bottle for possible analysis. Patsy's cold medicine contained huge amounts of strychnine. Stack says the FBI ruled out product tampering and that Patsy Wright seemed to have everything to live for. She had 2 children, a son, Wayne, and a daughter, Leslie, with whom she was very close. Sally and Patsy were successful businesswomen who owned 2 wax museums.
Oh, that's
it's amazing.
It's so weird.
Fucking creepy because wax museums are the creepiest.
And they
And a
really
set of
buried the
sisters.
lead on that.
Oh,
like,
I know.
My
I didn't
God.
know she was so rich and had wax museums.
Also, there's a lot of wax museums involved in this story. I had no idea how popular wax museums were.
Weird.
I guess it was before like we had a million photographs of celebrities all of the time, so
you wanted to see
them.
and-
I don't know. It's so
so
creepy.
I think it was just a cool quote art or technology too. That was
It was
fairly
definitely an
new.
art because
But,
I didn't.
having one to own 2 of them.
Oh my God.
It's
to
so
have an
weird.
area that needs not one, but more than
2,
one,
yeah.
but maybe up to 4 at a certain point, wax museums is
like
excessive.
so weird.
Yes. And also, I didn't include this, but I read a whole interview with the guy who made the wax figures. And he is now like one of the head of creatives at Universal.
Whoa.
Yeah, I found him on LinkedIn.
Wow.
The wax museums were worth over $6 million, which is bananas. Wow. Also, Patsy had recently bought 3 prize quarter horses, and she planned to train them herself. Dr. Joanne Houts, I think it's Houts or Couts, from the Tarrant County Medical Examiner. She wasn't the ME, she was a psychologist that worked with the ME. She tells us that it's highly unlikely that Patsy committed suicide or was high risk for suicide. Sergeant Jay Gustafson of the Arlington, Texas Police, who just is with this case forever and ever, this poor son of a gun, he began to investigate Patty's death as a murder. He had 2 clues that made him think the murderer was probably someone Patsy knew well. First, her alarm wasn't set the night she died, and second, only people close to her knew that she would take cold medicine at night to help her sleep. So Gustafson says, quote, I can pretty much say that this case involves someone that knew Patsy, knew her habits, and then I have to put together motive and opportunity. The first people he questioned were Sally and Steve Horning. Sally says that they asked some questions that were uncomfortable and she doesn't ever want to go through that again. Sorry for you, Sally. You're still alive and now you're a gajillionaire, so just answer a couple questions. When Patsy died, the museums were inherited by Sally and Steve. And Steve says that he was surprised and hurt that they were questioned, but they were questions that had to be asked. The police don't think that Steve and Sally did it because Steve wouldn't have given mouth to mouth if he knew that she had swallowed strychnine. They and other family members all took polygraphs and passed. They also looked into her former boyfriend, Leo Fikes, and gave him a polygraph. Fikes says that Patsy had rejected him and they hadn't been close prior to her death and he regrets it. Leo passed a polygraph and he seemed legitimately sad that she had died and they weren't close. Like it seemed like he really cared about her. But no, trust no one. All these people are shady as shit. Robert Cox, Patsy's ex-husband, was also a suspect. She had taken out a restraining order against him for harassment. Gustafson says that Patsy was afraid of Cox and she felt like he was watching her. Sally says that Patsy was going to be testifying against Robert in an upcoming civil suit about an arson fire, and that he had called her on a number of occasions and asked her to change her story, and she refused and insisted that she was going to tell the truth.
Like, the police are probably like, everyone has a motive.
This is like, it's so interesting to me that Agatha Christie uses strychnine, because this is actually like an Agatha Christie novel.
Yeah,
it is
that's
a
true.
collection of suspects that all had a motive and all had means, opportunity, and were going to gain something by this woman's death. It's so interesting. Wow. Gustafsson tells us that Cox was offered the same polygraph test that the other members of the family had been given, and he refused.
Oh, boy.
Both Robert Cox and Leo Fikes maintain their innocence, and Stack says that there's evidence to suggest that neither is guilty. And I'm like, okay, we'll see. So Stack says that next to her bedside were 2 empty dinner plates on a tray. He says it seems unlikely that Cox or Fikes would have spent, quote, an intimate evening with Patsy, sharing a late night dinner. He presumes that the person who was there may have known about Patsy's proclivity for taking cough medicine to sleep at night. Is like a late night bed dinner hot?
So weird on TV trays.
It is not.
Just one bed tray.
Yes.
Also, DNA testing up in here.
Test that dinner plate. Test that dinner plate. Test that lasagna right now.
Oh, see, girls, I love you both so much. No, we can't get any DNA testing on those dinner plates.
We cannot. It's not time yet.
So Stack tells us the day after Patsy died, her daughter Leslie received a phone call in which someone asked for Patsy. Leslie said she wasn't available and she could take a message, and the woman persisted. So Leslie told the caller, in a very sweet way that I never would have done, that Patsy had passed away.
Oh my gosh, yes, this poor woman.
This poor little, I mean, she was a teenager. She was a kid.
Yeah.
She's like, no, she's not around. No, she's not around. No, I'm sorry. She passed away. I would have been like, fuck you. I just would have hung up. Like,
I wouldn't
really?
even answer.
Yes. She's like boxing up her mom's stuff. It's horrible. I know. And then the caller responds after Leslie tells her that Patsy had passed away. The caller responded by saying, quote, well, good. I wanted her dead. Or something like that.
The fuck?
Leslie says. Leslie theorizes it may have been a prank phone call, girl. Or maybe someone had wanted confirmation that Patsy did die. Quote, it could be totally unrelated. It could be unrelated. I don't know, said Leslie. Honey, it's related.
Honey.
Come on. Stop. So.
She did say it was a woman, though? Because in my notes, I didn't
forgot
have...
about that. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Oh, it was a woman. The authorities are convinced that the murderer is someone, I'm going to keep repeating this because they keep repeating it, someone who knew Patsy well.
Yes.
Fucking get it.
They knew about her NyQuil problem.
Yes, her proclivity for NyQuil. Stop NyQuil shaming her. Who among us?
Yeah.
Who among
us hasn't woken up in the middle of the night and chugged a bottle of NyQuil?
Even just
NyQuil shaming.
before.
Come on. You know, they're acting like she's like taking dope before she goes to sleep.
I'm always a little happy when I have a cold so that I can take
take
it without
NyQuil.
needing to make an excuse
I
for
know.
it. Someone wouldn't have to know she takes cold medicine sometimes to sleep. Like,
They could
you're
have been
gonna
waiting it
get a
out.
cold,
Yeah.
and she's going to take the cold medicine
Yeah.
that she has. It doesn't have to be someone that knows her intimately.
Yeah.
I mean,
It probably
Also,
was.
is it flavorless?
But-
Like, maybe that was the kind of substance you could not detect.
Strychnine doesn't have any flavor
Okay.
or any scent when it's in pure powder form, especially if it's mixed into something like cold medicine that has thick texture
Thick,
and
right.
is so
Strong, yeah.
Which is different than cyanide because that smells like almonds, right?
That smells like almonds during the autopsy. It smells like bitter almonds.
yeah.
And only some people can smell it.
Yes.
And
Which
it's
is so
that
crazy.
doesn't have any flavor or taste either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's poison. I mean, of course women poison. It's fucking brilliant. Of course we poison.
It is one way
It's
to go.
genius. So Leslie also says it's hard for her and her brother because if the person knew Patsy very well, the chances are the children knew the person because the children knew most of the people that Patsy knew. Sadly, Leslie ends by saying she doesn't really know who to trust anymore. Update. The show provides no updates.
Nothing.
Which, as we know by now, that is not a great sign for my mental health. So put on your comfy pants and grab a glass of wine, because I have a feeling it's rabbit hole time, my little Ted Bunnies. Let's go. First of all, the poison, it was in NyQuil. Vicks owns it. Sorry, Vicks. Someone poisoned your NyQuil. It's cool. Just say NyQuil.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be mad at the company.
I
Like
know.
Vicks didn't do it. Patsy had a best friend, Karen Beatty, who was, I think, also her accountant or financial manager. Karen Beatty tells us that Patsy's fondness for NyQuil began when both of their children were small. The young mothers discovered that it was great in small doses for teething babies.
Okay.
Patsy.
I thought they used it on themselves because they were mothers of young babies.
No, they gave it to the babies.
Okay.
They gave it to the babies. The 70s.
It doesn't matter if you take it if your kid's not sleeping.
Yeah, you're just tripping your
just-
balls on NyQuil, but
exactly.
you're still awake,
Yeah.
you know? After they discovered that, Patsy began using it as a cure-all. Quote, I used to tease her about being a NyQuil head, Karen Beatty said in what I assume is a Texas accent. Is everyone here's from Texas?
No.
Yeah. So Gustafson is quoted as saying, everyone I talked to said they knew she took it.
Oh my God, she tells everybody.
Yeah, it isn't. It's a
did
small
not narrow it
circle,
down.
but it doesn't narrow it down to 4 people. It's like 25 people. And then this is what he said, something like you were just saying, which I think is really interesting. Quote, when someone can go to the extent of putting a scheme together like this, there is no sense of urgency.
Right.
Gustafson said.
Totally.
Quote, this isn't rage or a domestic fracas. This one is just put the stuff in and walk away. They knew sooner or later that she would drink it, which I think is super interesting because so many of these suspects are kind of motivated by a level of immediacy, like financially. Of course, she was going to eventually take it, but you were just willing to to wait it out.
Just wanted her
But
dead.
exactly. Yeah. You don't care when.
Which is why
And you probably still know it's going to be within the year, most likely.
Yeah, and that's why I have a theory.
Ooh.
Yeah. So Stack says the FBI knew it wasn't package tampering, and I was kind of like, well, that's sort of fucked up. Yeah. So this is how. There were no other reports of people getting sick or dying from the product, which is generally the case when a product on the shelf has been tampered with, like the Chicago Tylenol murders.
That's exactly what I thought of, and that's
Yeah.
exactly what I assumed is that no one else.
Yeah, so the bottle had already been opened. There was
Yeah.
no packaging material in the trash bin.
Right.
So, and it was just her that got sick. A day after the strychnine was discovered, a roundtable discussion was held on the matter of Patsy Wright's death. Gustafson met with Tarrant, County Chief's medical examiner, and representatives from the EPA, the FBI, Dallas Police Department, Intelligence Division, and the Vicks Corporation, because Vicks is like this. We are not pulling products.
Yeah.
No one say NyQuil. No one fucking say NyQuil. Yep. So no other cases of poisoning had been reported from the lot number on the bottle. Gustafson presented the report, and the FBI representative ruled out product tampering. This clearly seemed to be an isolated attack against a single person, putting the case squarely in Gustafson's lap. This segment originally aired in 1989, which means that when Stack said there was only one other murder by strychnine in the U.S. since 1950, so I couldn't find the instance that Stack was talking about. But here are a couple pre-1950s strychnine poisoning murders. Alexander the Great may have been poisoned by strychnine in contaminated wine. 323 BC. In the late 19th century, serial killer Thomas Neal Crean used strychnine to murder several sex workers on the streets of London.
Oh my God. No.
Your girl Belle Gunnis of LaPorte, Indiana, also known as Lady Bluebeard, allegedly used strychnine to murder some of her victims at the turn of the 20th century.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I knew you would like that one. And then finally, this is an interesting case that I want to look more into. Jane Stanford, the co-founder of Stanford University and the wife of California Governor Leland Stanford, died from strychnine poisoning in 1905. Her last recorded words were, quote, "My jaws are stiff. This is a horrible death to die." Her murderer was never identified. So, apparently, if you want to see what strychnine poisoning looks like,
No, I don't.
King Joffrey's fabulous death in Game of Thrones
Was modeled after
is
it?
said to mimic the effects. But from what I've read about
fucking
strychnine,
terrible.
and I rewatched Joffrey's death scene because of it's amazing, I don't think it does strychnine justice. Like, I really
Yeah,
don't.
probably not. It would probably be a
It's
bit more violent.
Yes. So the way that you can get it is through rat poison. So the pest control form that was used to kill coyotes, gophers, rats, and other pests contains less than 3% strychnine. Now you can't get it in rat poisoning. It's been replaced with zinc phosphide. The strychnine that killed Patsy was in pure powder form, the most concentrated type of strychnine available. Fewer than 600 outlets nationwide dealt with this type of poison, and even in the 80s, all sales were regulated by the federal government. But Gustafsson also discovered it was available in some college chemistry labs, so someone could have sneaked into a lab and stole a small amount.
Oh my
the
God.
worst place it could possibly be.
Wow.
Yep. So we're going to leave that there, and then we're going to shift gears back to Patsy. Sally and Patsy grew up in the Park Cities, the only children of Tom and Virginia Bolton. Virginia was a housewife, and Tom a successful, if somewhat eccentric, oil man. I guess by eccentric, they mean an environmentally exploitive, wealthy old white man constantly suing and being sued by other environmentally exploitive old white men. Hashtag not all wealthy, litigious, environmentally exploitive old white men who had a passion for, you guessed it, Texas history and guns.
Oh, damn.
In the early 60s, Tom Bolton took a trip to London to see Madame Tussauds famous wax museum.
Okay, I was going to say there's something about his history that leads to that. Yeah.
When he returned, Bolton went to a family of wax sculptors and commissioned 72 original figures, turned down by two banks whose loan officers had literally never heard of a wax museum. They were like, you want to do what with, huh?
Yeah.
That's nightmare fuel.
Yeah.
No. Finally, Bolton borrowed $250,000 from the Republic Bank in Dallas to fund the venture. The figures, composed of wax heads and hands attached to steel-framed torsos, were of Texas and Southwest historical characters, mostly gunfighters, Bat Masterson, Wyatt Earp, and Billy the Kid. They were to accompany a collection of famous gunslingers' weapons, first compiled by a Texas lawman and then owned by a gun collector who wanted to sell them to Bolton because he kept getting robbed, which I find deliciously ironic. A house full of guns and people keep robbing you for your guns? Like, get a good gun to protect the other guns. In 1963, Tom Bolton opened his Southwest Historical Wax Museum in Fair Park, where it was a big success, especially during the annual state fair when 12 to 13,000 people would see it per day. Bolton later added figures such as Mickey Mantle and Babe Deirdrickson Zacharias, who I had to look up. It turns out she was an American athlete who excelled in golf, basketball, baseball, and track and field. She won 2 gold medals in track and field at the 1932 Summer Olympics before turning into a professional golfer and winning 10 LPGA major championships. She is widely regarded as one of the greatest athletes of all time.
Of course we haven't heard of her because she has a vagina.
Exactly. During college, Sally and Patsy worked there in the summers. Sally had gone to work for her father as a secretary running the museum office. Patsy then joined her in 1973 on the public relations end. Tom Bolton died in 1976, setting off a vicious inheritance battle between the sisters and their stepmother. Sally and Patsy ultimately won, becoming controlling owners of the museum, but Patsy later told her friend Karen Beatty, who was her friend and financial advisor, that she would never leave her financial affairs in disarray, adamant that her own children would not have to go through such a fight for what was rightfully theirs. Patsy and Bill Wright had prospered in Arlington, moving to a large colonial-style house on Shady Valley Lane, but in 1980 they divorced. An executive for a department store chain, Bill Wright was a workaholic, and after an amicable divorce, he moved to Houston and later remarried. When Patsy Wright died, many were surprised to discover that he had been designated as the executor of her estate. So it really just seems like they had a really good relationship, and it seemed like there was still a lot of love there, but it just didn't work. Sally and Patsy did a good job of running the museum, but friends say there was an undercurrent of feelings not uncommon between sisters. Sally seemed jealous of Patsy's good looks, an instant appeal to men, which I could totally see because Patsy was a fucking smoke show.
Oh, yeah.
And that's got to be annoying. Sally would tell friends that Patsy allowed men to use her. And Patsy would get impatient with Sally's unwillingness to stand up for herself. Sally divorced her first husband in 1981. So when the 80s were getting underway, both sisters were single and looking for new relationships. So we're leaving Sally and Patsy for a second. Although not mentioned in the segment, another employee of the museum, Patsy's secretary, Lori Ann Williams, mysteriously died in 1984. Oh. Shortly before her death, she had complained of stomach problems. Her cause of death was officially listed as viral pneumonia. However, a forensic scientist believed that she was also poisoned. It's not known if the two deaths are related. Also not mentioned in this segment was that the wax museum was burned down in an apparent arson fire in 1988.
Ooh, that's a lot of melty
So
wax.
melty.
It is amazing how many of these accidentally burned down.
Carlin, don't you want to squish the wax?
I do. I'm thinking about it right now.
Are you a wax
Sounds
squisher?
satisfying.
Oh, I love it. I just want to pour it all over me.
Wow, that took a turn.
No, I don't, but I do like to squish it.
All right. You and Stanley Pointer, who was later caught trying to steal a ledger from the museum's ashes, could squish the wax together.
Okay.
Stanley had a previous arrest for arson. As a result, he was investigated in the case along with Patsy and Lorianne's deaths. However, he was never charged in any of the cases. He was shot and killed by Dallas police after they attempted to rearrest him for more questioning. He apparently was so afraid of talking to the police again that he attempted to run down a cop and was shot. Yeah. During the segment, Patsy calls Sally, tells her that she doesn't feel well, and Sally and Steve rush over. And I was wondering why no one said, and then I called 911.
Right. She doesn't call 911 until they get there.
Yeah.
He has already started CPR, which I thought was weird.
Yeah. So I did too. Apparently, Sally had called the police department, but because she didn't know the address of Patsy's home because it was a new rental house, like it was a temporary living situation for Patsy,
Right.
the dispatcher couldn't send an ambulance over because they had no idea where to send it. So Steve and Sally jumped into the car and drove over there.
They should have explained that. Why did they not just
They
add
left
that
it.
little
They
detail?
always leave a ton of stuff out. So
Weird.
Steve and Sally jumped in the car. In their haste, they backed into another car. So you know that they were in a rush. And they raced the few miles to Patsy's house on Home Oak Street. So the front door was locked. Sally didn't have a key. She later remembered Patsy telling her that the spare keys that she kept over the double oven had disappeared. So I don't know if there was like an outdoor cookout area. She had stashed some spare keys. They had disappeared.
Oh, God.
So once they were able to get inside the house, they called the police. Only Steve noticed the plates, apparently. Steve later told police that he moved a table with 2 plates on it from the bed and began to administer CPR. Apparently, the paramedics denied seeing these plates. But what's weird is that in the UM reenactment, it shows one of the paramedics moving the plates out of the way when they arrive.
Right.
Yeah. So I know the reenactments can be wrong, but this segment never gives any impression that there's a dispute about these plates.
They talk about them in the way that we're one of the 2 exes there with her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was it an intimate dinner?
Yeah.
But not only
don't
one
s-
person reported seeing them.
But they might not have even been there.
But even if there were 2 plates there, so what? I think I use multiple plates when I eat sometimes.
I know. I thought that too.
She's like living her best life.
Yeah.
You know, she's a divorcee. Eat all the food in bed you want. Have 7 plates by your bed. Who
Take
cares?
some cold medicine and go to sleep.
Yes. God, everyone is judging poor Patsy. And I am right there with her.
Your best.
Gustafsson says that he remembers hearing the tape of the emergency phone call, and Sally, talking to the dispatcher, she can be heard saying, "You have to blow into her mouth," as if instructing Steve as he performed CPR. So I think that he did it, but the paramedics at the scene said they didn't believe that he actually performed CPR on Patsy. They said the instant they began CPR, Patsy coughed up a lot of clear fluid, and this indicated to them that no one had previously cleared her airway. Quote, "Nobody successfully performed CPR on that woman," one paramedic told Gustafsson. Randy Jones, one of the paramedics who was on duty that night, says there was little they could do. Patsy had no pulse, no blood pressure, and her eyes were beginning to dilate. She was rushed to Arlington Memorial Hospital, where she was declared dead at 4:15 a.m. Patrolman Patrick Bridges picked up the bottle of NyQuil and dropped it into an evidence bag. So I don't know if he was just like, this is weird, or Sally was like, she said that she had
Yeah,
taken
in the
it.
episode, that's how they said it.
Oh,
Was that
really?
She told them.
Yeah, because I read something else where Steve said that he picked up the bottle of NyQuil. So there's like a lot of...
Weird.
Yep. So Patsy's windows had been broken sometime before this happened, and that's why she got the alarm system, but nothing had been stolen. So maybe somebody broke into her house that night and put the strychnine in her NyQuil bottle, which was weeks before she had even taken it. So there's a ton of comments on the message boards because this was never solved, sadly. And there's somebody out there named, the handle is Covair, and he's been commenting on forums. And this was about 10 years ago, but he popped up everywhere for a while. At one point he said, quote, "Check the Mansfield feed stores. That's where he most likely purchased the strychnine. He may have even had a federal license to purchase it. The person I've mentioned dated Lori Ann Williams, who worked at Patsy Wright's wax museum. She also died mysteriously before Patsy's death. So at first I thought they were talking about Stanley Pointer, but he was really young at that time. He was 25 when he was killed in 1991 by the police, and Lorianne was just 23 when she was killed in 1984. And then somebody mentioned the name Alexander, so I started this other path, and I found this awesome article published in 1989, D Street Magazine. I think it's like a Dallas local magazine. Most of the following information comes from that. The finger pointing by family members started as soon as Gustafsson began his interrogations. Someone would tell Gustafsson that he ought to look at so-and-so, and then so-and-so would point right back to his or her accuser. Aware that Leslie and Wayne, both students at Texas Tech, would inherit their mother's sizable estate, he had quizzed each as a matter of routine. He asked them to take a polygraph. They agreed. They passed. Apparently, Patsy had a boyfriend at the time named Larry Todd. UM didn't mention that. He was living in Austin. He was so devastated by Patsy's death, he told Leslie he couldn't go to the memorial service, but he did end up attending it, and nobody mentions him again.
Again, why did UM leave that out?
Well, and when they were like, could it have been a mysterious lover? It's like, well, she did have a boyfriend at the time.
That's what I'm saying.
You know, like
that would be.
They were like, it wouldn't have been one of the exes, so
yeah.
She had a boyfriend.
She had a fucking boyfriend. She had a lot going on, which is fine. Good for her. The finger pointing grew more furious when it was discovered that days after Patsy's death, Bill and Bonnie Alexander boarded Patsy's horses. Bill and Bonnie had cashed a check she had given them. She had written in the day before her death, and then signed her name next to a notation that read, quote, saddle. The Alexanders had added the word fees and filled in the amount for $4,000 the day she died. The morning that she had passed away, Patsy had asked Karen Beatty, her financial advisor, to liquidate some assets because she was buying a ranch in Aledo, Texas, and moving her horses and all of her stuff to this ranch that she was purchasing. Basically, she was like, I want out. I'll continue to own the business, but I just want to go and hang out with horses on this ranch now. And when Karen was transferring this money for her, it was $125,000. Karen Beatty asked her, are there any other outstanding checks that I should be aware of? Patsy said no. So she would have said yes if she knew she had just cut a check for $4,000. The family grew even more suspicious when they learned that Patsy's expensive horses were in the Alexanders' name. The Alexanders had become a major part of Patsy's life in the previous year. Patsy told several of her friends that if she could, quote, find a man like Bill Alexander, she'd marry him. Patsy had bought several horses through the Alexanders and was paying them for board and training. She had spent the month of June living with them, working on her riding. Bonnie says Patsy gave them the check and simply told them to add up what she owed them for several months' board and contest entry fees. And the horses were in the Alexander names for another good reason. Patsy didn't want her brother-in-law, Steve Horning, to get his hands on them in case something happened to her. Both passed a polygraph. So now we have like 6 suspects.
Damn, this is crazy.
Yeah. Several months after beginning his investigation, Gustafsson got an anonymous phone call. Quote, did you know that Leo Fikes dated Linda Donahue? The man's voice asked. Detective Jim Ford, who was in Gustafsson's department, had been working on the murder of Linda Donahue, a beautiful, sexy Arlington woman who drove a Corvette and ran with a fast crowd. Obviously, that's a quote. I would never write that. She had been found by her sister in her bedroom, her nude body stabbed through the neck and smeared with swaths of blood. Gustafsson knew that Patsy had dated and dumped Leo Fikes. Searching through Donahue's personal effects, the detectives found Fikes' business card. Quote, I was wondering when you were going to get to me, Leo Fikes told Gustafsson when he called him in for questioning. Leo Fikes had attended Southern Methodist University, where he took a number of courses in chemistry. Gustafsson wondered if Fikes could have learned about strychnine in those classes. In the early 70s, Fikes bought a franchise for a company that became Fikes Chemical. But the company, a restroom sanitizing service, had nothing to do with strychnine. Investigators did discover that Fikes had made a purchase in the summer of 1987 at the only outlet that sold strychnine in Dallas, but strychnine was not one of the chemicals listed on the receipt.
Okay.
Leo met Patsy in 1981 after she and Cox abruptly divorced. Fikes asked her out. They discovered they both had a love for horses, and Fikes introduced her to an old hobby of his, cutting horses.
What?
Yeah, I know. It's not cutting horses.
I've heard that term before.
They're fine. Cutting is a Western-style equestrian competition in which a horse and rider work as a team before a judge or panel of judges to demonstrate the horse's athleticism and ability to handle cattle during a 2.5-minute performance called a run. I watched a video. It's a horse moving cows. I don't get it, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yep. Patsy and Fike's relationship faltered over Fike's refusal to quit playing the field. Ironically, after a reconciliation, Patsy ended the relationship because he suddenly wanted to get married. And after her marriage to Robert Cox, which was disastrous, Patsy told friends she would never again tie the knot. Leo Fikes, he was later excluded as a suspect. He seemed genuinely upset by her murder and regretful that he had let his hurt ego prevent them from being closer before she died. Fikes also passed in 2014, so if it was him, he didn't make a deathbed confession, and we will never know. So that brings us back to the two original suspects. Though Gustafson and the investigators in the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office will not say so, it's obvious that the investigation largely has narrowed to two people: Robert Cox, Patsy's ex-husband, and Steve Horning, her brother-in-law. Steve Horning married her sister Sally in 1981. They had met when his landscaping maintenance company was doing some work for the Wax Museum. Patsy at first was thrilled. Though Steve was several years younger than Sally, her sister was happy, acting, quote, giddy like a young girl again, said a friend. But Patsy's opinion of Steve soon changed. Steve claimed that he and Patsy had a, quote, good but distant relationship, a description that brought hoots of laughter and astonished looks from Patsy's friends and acquaintances, who said she called Steve, quote, a phony and plastic. They say it infuriated her that Steve in just a few years had spent all of Sally's inheritance and had gone into debt, that much more, playing the commodities market and going big game hunting. In one instance, they describe his office, and I guess there's all these like dead stuffed animals. There's like this giant cougar, and the reporter's like, "Oh, where'd you shoot that? You know, like where were you?" And Steve's like, "In the heart." Like, gross.
God.
Yes.
Not what I meant.
Yeah. Even on the afternoon before her death, Patty went into a tirade about Steve. Quote, I don't want Steve Horning anywhere around me, she told a friend. In June of 1987, Patsy, determined to keep Steve from ever owning any portion of her assets, had discussed making a major change in a buy-sell agreement she had with Sally. Each sister had $500,000 of a life insurance policy on the other. So if one died, the survivor had to use the money to buy the other's share of the stock, leaving one sister as sole owner. The other sister's heirs would split the $500,000. It seemed like a good plan, and they signed it in June 1985, but several things had happened that made Patty uneasy since then. The museum's stock had escalated in value, and Sally was diagnosed with cancer in the fall of 1985. So she had had chemotherapy, and then finally her cancer was declared in remission. But both sisters agreed that the buy-sell agreement needed to be changed because there was way more money on the line now. They scheduled a board meeting for early November to discuss the changes, but Patsy died 2 weeks before that meeting. Patsy had a lot going on. She's like testifying in civil trials for $1.3 million. She's renegotiating millions of dollars here. Like, it's crazy. Yeah. Since she died before November, the buy-sell agreement went into effect. Despite Leslie and Wayne's pleading that Sally give them their mother's stock instead of money, Sally refused, telling them that they were too young and the stock was worth more than it had been when the arrangement was signed. Meanwhile, Steve, under community property laws, had a claim to 25% of the stock. Quote, we're setting up an ironclad will that will give them the museum upon our deaths, Steve says. But if Sally died before Steve, he would own the whole thing and he could just change the will. And that's exactly what Patsy was trying to prevent when she was murdered. Sources say that in 1970, Steve had been arrested and charged with assaulting a woman. The charges were later dropped. At one point, Patsy had a friend run a background check on Horning. She told another friend that the report, quote, wasn't good, and she destroyed it. He did agree to take 2 polygraphs. The first one was inconclusive, and then he passed the second. 11 months after Patsy died, the Wax Museum of the Southwest burned to the ground. Arson investigators ruled that the fire had started at Electrical Box. The insurance paid $4 million, not nearly enough to replace the museum, which would cost about $5 million. But almost immediately, Sally and Steve Horning began rebuilding the facility, replacing the Western motif with Aladdin's Palace. And then the other suspect is Robert Cox. Robert Cox versus Hartford Lloyd's Insurance Company. Cox was suing the insurance company for $400,000 plus punitive damages for failure to pay his claim after the contents of his wax museum burned. A different wax museum.
What is going on in Texas?
Everybody loves it. Bunch of wax squishes there.
Oh my God. So the insurance company was claiming that Cox, in a desperate financial straits, had the fire set in order to collect the insurance. After selling his fabric chain to Pier 1 in 1970 for more than $1 million, I know. Wow. Cox became an investor, buying and operating a number of companies with his wife, Emily Kitty Cox. One of the companies was a wax museum that featured all the American presidents. So he moved his wax museum into Patsy's old wax museum, but they didn't know each other then, and he was still married to this woman, Kitty. He owned the museum with 8 other investors, but the wax museum was, in Cox's word, an artistic triumph and a financial disappointment.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. So in 1975, he bought the whole collection from the other investors for $30,000. And then he began to try to move or sell his museum. He even took an ad out in a paper describing a, quote, $500,000 wax museum for sale at a bargain price.
Wow.
Imagine like on Craigslist. So in January 1981, Cox called Patsy and Sally asking if they might be interested in buying the museum. Patsy had the collection appraised and made an offer, $14,000. Oh. Cox was insulted, but negotiations didn't prevent him from asking Patsy out. Though they were separated, Cox was still married to Kitty, and Patsy told him to ask her again after the divorce was final. They began dating several months later, with Patsy at first under the mistaken impression that Cox was officially single again. She fell in love with him, and though he was 14 years older than she was, he treated her like a queen, bringing her into his glitzy social circle, which included charity balls and parties at the country club. The Coxes finally got divorced in February of 1983. In January of 1983, Cox and Patsy took a trip to Galveston together, and he wanted to show her his plans to install another wax museum. Patsy told Bill Phillips, the manager at her museum, that she was surprised to see sets, figures, and costumes stacked seemingly at random in the middle of this dilapidated building. Cox told her he planned to restore the building and hoped to be ready to be open by the time tourist season started. But on February 1st, shortly after midnight, fires were set inside the building, destroying the contents. Cox would later claim that hobos seeking shelter set the fires. Attorneys for his insurance company would allege that Cox caused the fires to be set, bringing all of this out in trial because he was in dire financial straits. Patsy apparently knew nothing of his finances when she married Robert Cox at the Dallas Country Club in April 1983, several months after the fire. But almost instantly, she would tell her friends that it began on their wedding day. Robert Cox changed. No longer the charming, attentive suitor, he became verbally abusive to her and her family. What frustrated Patsy most was the fact that Cox lived off her earnings. She paid for the house, the utilities, the food, everything. Occasionally, Cox would drop several $100s on her dresser, and he once bought a big screen television for the house. Patsy footed the rest of the bills. Patsy knew that Cox enjoyed card games, but now she discovered that he spent most of his afternoons at the Dallas Country Club playing gin and poker for big bucks in a room off of the 19th Hole Club. Ugh, rich people. Mm-hmm. Gambling had long been a problem for Cox. In Kitty's divorce petition, she cited her fear that his gambling would bankrupt the family companies. Patsy realized the end of her marriage was near when the IRS tried to attach her earnings to pay Cox's tax debts, which were about $300,000. She told friends that he tried to have the prenuptial agreement declared null and void. It was just a mess. So Patsy called Kitty Cox. Kitty referred her to a therapist who had given Kitty and Robert couples therapy, and the therapist told Patsy that he was a sociopath and that she should get out of the marriage.
Whoa.
Yeah. So in April 1984, Patsy and Bob Cox separated. Their divorce was final in October. Patsy told friends that Robert Cox was frantic, that she was going to try to get his Dallas Country Club membership in the settlement. And she told friends that she didn't care at all about the fucking country club. She just wanted to get rid of him. And her shame at being fooled led her to tell her friends that she would never marry again. Quote, "I can't trust myself to make good decisions," Patsy said. Friends say that Patsy told them he began following her, parking outside of her house at night. One of Cox's employees called Patsy, letting her know that Cox had borrowed her car in order to tail her. Patsy also told friends that Cox threatened to, quote, ruin her. And she remembered Cox telling her when they were married that he knew people who could, quote, get anything done, including having someone, quote, snuffed out. So at the urging of her aunt and her sister, she installed the security system and also got a restraining order against Cox. After Patsy's death, Gustafson interviewed Cox, who would say little beyond, quote, "I met her, I married her, I divorced her." He refused to take a polygraph and would not cooperate with the crew from Unsolved Mysteries. Apparently, right after Patsy's death, Robert Cox threw a party at the Dallas Country Club, and it was a murder mystery party.
Oh, timely.
One of the partygoers said Bob was the only one who guessed the murderer had hired a hitman.
Oh.
Yep. So this Covair person, again, popped up in 2008 and said, there are a lot of little details I will not post on this site, but I will share the following details. I know of a man who I know for a fact was seeing Patsy. This fact is probably known to about 3 people in this world. One is dead, one is somewhere, and the other is writing this letter. This person worked part-time for a local horse ranch where rats were a common problem. Patsy did not know that I knew she was seeing this guy, and I never said anything to anybody until after her death. I did not know this person well, and he disappeared soon after Patsy's death. His father did own a local business which closed years ago. I do remember his name and also his hometown. I can tell you Patsy was what I would call a socialite. She ran in a completely different circle than he did. He was quite a bit younger and was basically a ranch hand. That may have been one of the reasons she wanted to keep it quiet.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So ever since the first airing of Unsolved Mysteries, everybody has talked about the mystery man who may have been in the house that night. All I'm trying to do is point authorities to someone who I think may fit the bill. All they have to do is contact me, and I'll be more than happy to meet with them. I live only about 10 minutes from the police department. And everybody's like, all right, well then go. And at some point he says, I did have a meeting set with an officer about 3 years ago. I waited for 2 hours and he never showed. So he left, and that's it. He never went back. Robin Werder covered this case on Trail Went Cold a couple of years ago, again, because he's always 3 years ahead of us. And I didn't listen to it until after I had done all of this research, but he basically sort of said the same thing. He has a theory that this Covair commenter is also someone by the name of Jim Ferguson. The name is too common to look up. And 11 years ago, he said he was the only person alive who knew about this mystery suspect. And I think based on the information that he gave Sitcoms Online when he signed up, I think he'd be about 74 now. So I'm not sure if he's still alive or not. So it's theories. I initially thought that it was Steve because he was garbage with money. He was in debt. He blew through Sally's inheritance. And he's such a religion freak now. And we've seen in the past that people who probably did it really get into God.
And
he's
some
the
of
one.
the other circumstances of like how they found her and stuff were weird.
Yeah. Patsy and Sally were about to reevaluate their financial situations. I mean, he's a great suspect. And that's why I think he's the one that burned down the wax museum after Patsy died. I think he hired this Stanley Pointer guy to burn the museum. And then I think Stanley either went back to get the ledger because Steve sent him or because Stanley was an arsonist who got off on fires and just wanted like a memento or a token. And then when they tried to question Stanley again, he freaked out because now he knew he was being looked at for 2 murders. I think that's how that's connected. I don't think that Steve had Patsy killed. Like, I don't think he would have done that to Sally. And then Robert Cox, an abusive piece of shit. He wanted Patsy to lie on the stand. It's also super suspicious that it was only 10 days before she was supposed to testify. Right. He's a full-on garbage person and a very obvious suspect. But then I found pure powder form of strychnine is generally used underground to kill a specific type of gopher called a pocket gopher. Pure powder form of strychnine has also been used for subcutaneous and intramuscular injection in horses to improve performance, sort of like doping an athlete before a sporting event.
Shitty.
I know that you could steal strychnine from a chem lab and et cetera, but the situation with the Alexanders kind of stinks. Patsy clearly had a thing for him. She claimed that she never did anything about it because he was married, but I think Bonnie was tired of Patsy hanging around. I think maybe the Alexanders were either trying to like get money out of her and they were hustling her and it got kind of out of hand because that absolutely comes back to like the ranch hand and her having like a secret thing with somebody out of her social
and
class.
And then they cashed that check for $4,000.
Yes.
Right?
And they owned those fucking horses.
Yeah.
And she was buying that ranch. So she was pulling all of her horses, all of the stuff. Like she was going to hire other people to work on her ranch. So they were losing so much money. And she lived with them for like, it's just a very bizarre situation. Yeah. We were saying like, this isn't a crime of passion. So it isn't like they were lovers and they got into a fight and someone poisoned. Like this is something that someone is happy to wait for.
As long as you die at some point.
And then happy to call and confirm.
Oh, yeah.
God, that part is so fucking weird.
Yeah. So
and it would make sense that the daughter wouldn't recognize her voice.
Of course
maybe
not.
she didn't.
She didn't know it. Yep. And traditionally, women are poisoners, as dozens of male commenters reminded me every fourth comment on every forum. So for better or worse, those are the statistics.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the story of Patsy Bolton Wright. That's it.
Wow.
Hours of insanity.
That's so crazy.
It got nowhere.
That's the most suspects we've ever had.
Viable suspect.
Yes.
Yeah. Totally.
So there you go. There's the story of Patsy Bolton Wright.
This could have been its own episode.
Yes, it truly could have been.
Great job. Wow.
Yes, we had, I think, said in the last episode that this was about William Betts, and it is, but it's about a lot of other men as well. So I'm just going to say it's about the SS Muskogee. Stack intros the segment by setting the scene December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and the U.S. was thrust into World War II. He says, in the Pacific, the Japanese claimed victory after victory, but in the Atlantic, the German Navy threatened the sea lanes in America's backyard. He explains that the German U-boats even came into New York Harbor and Chesapeake Bay. This is all said over multiple cuts of black and white German war footage, which, like, I know exists, but I just never have realized there was so much. They had a lot of it. The Germans honestly did so much documentation, which will come up again in this segment.
They were super proud of themselves.
Yeah, it's great. Like, the level at which they did this was really, I just never knew it was like that. So Stack tells us about 39-year-old William Betts, an American father of 2 boys, who was captain of the SS Muskogee. So the Muskogee was a 7,034-ton oil tanker that would bring oil up and down the Atlantic for the war effort. Stack explains that Betts literally didn't even have the time, like when he was at the home port, to see his family. So his wife would go there to see him. It's crazy. So his wife Ellen would go visit him. February 2nd, 1942, 2 months after Pearl Harbor, the Muskogee was getting ready to leave port again. Ellen went to say goodbye to him, and it would be the couple's final farewell. So UM says that Ellen went back home to her sons and waited for word. But they didn't give a lot of detail on timelines in this part, so I'm not entirely sure, but it seems like it was pretty quick after that everything happened. I found a letter that William had written to Ellen after he left, but before everything happened. So it was February 7th, 1942, just 5 days after they'd left their home port. William Betts had written a letter to Ellen about how he had witnessed the torpedoing of 2 merchant vessels. It said, "We were in the vicinity of the Japan Arrow and the Sargal when they were torpedoed, but cannot explain at this time why the sub did not get us too. We saw the distress flares from the boats of Sargal, but would not take a chance on going near them as we have been torpedoed too. If I live to have grandchildren, I will have plenty of exciting stories to tell them."
Oh my God.
Heartbreaking.
So many people died in that fucking war.
So many. So, jumping back into the UM story, I'm not sure how long after, but a few weeks after Ellen received that last letter, she gets a telegram from the ship company, which was just like this company in New Jersey, saying that the ship was, quote, probably lost on its way north. That's it.
And it was just one, it's usually like, maybe they only do that when it's official, like Navy officers would come and tell.
Don't they bring you a flag or something?
That's why I'm saying it's like the ship company sent this.
Right.
It
That's
wasn't
not
so
it wasn't the
fucking weird.
yeah.
sad.
So she just doesn't know anything.
That is terrible to do to somebody.
I know. It's awful. And just probably lost a 7,000
like-
some ton boat.
Yeah. And as if like there aren't human beings on it.
I know.
So a year later, their eldest son, George, was actually drafted himself. For 13 years, there were no clues as to anything. So this poor family just had no idea whatever happened to William.
What a terrible time to be alive.
Oh my God. I know. I love when people are like, the good old days.
Yeah, like your husband dies and then you have to worry about your son getting drafted.
Yeah. Just the sheer numbers is like staggering. In 1955, a work friend of George, the son, showed him a book about German submarines called The Sea Wolves. George said it was the first clue as to what maybe happened to his father. He says, quote, "It told of how this submarine, the U-123, as soon as they arrived in their battle zone, why they came upon the tanker Muskogee and sunk it." So George starts researching the Muskogee. Stack says that the Muskogee was one of 413 ships sunk by German U-boats in 1942. 29,000 merchant sailors lost their lives.
Jesus Christ.
Among them, 34 missing mariners from the SS Muskogee. So when all this happened, the Muskogee had been carrying oil from Venezuela to Halifax. And like the trajectory of where it had been before that was crazy. I just didn't realize how far like these people went like on one mission. Stack then shows us photos taken from the U-boat U-123 minutes after it torpedoed the Muskogee. They'd been taken by a German war correspondent and show 7 survivors from William Betts' ships.
Oh, yeah.
So this picture is crazy. I'm going to show it to you guys again just because
I don't remember.
It's breathtaking.
Oh my goodness. So those were the 7 people that survived.
Well, these are the 7 that were on this
Raft?
Raft. We're going to call it a raft because I'm still confused about that. So just to describe the picture, it's 7 men just floating in the Atlantic on like what looks to be like a wooden piece of the ship. Like I was even like, is this even...
Yeah.
They called it a raft, but I was like, is it just like a part of the ship?
I think it absolutely is just a part of
And
the
when
ship.
I saw pictures of it later, it looks like some of the pieces from the top. So I don't know if they were intended to be rafts or not, but it's crazy. It's just wood. 2 of the men in the picture like appear to be yelling in the direction of the photographer. So it's just like, oh my gosh. Stack says that all 7 would perish at sea.
Wait, how would they perish at sea if someone took their photograph? Because the Germans took it and they didn't help them?
I'll explain all of that.
What about prisoners of war? That's so fucked up.
So Stack explains that these photos...
I didn't understand either.
Yeah. Stack explains that these photos are what helped George discover what had happened. Betts says that he couldn't see his dad in the photo, and knowing that he was the captain, it was safe to assume that his dad went down with the ship.
God damn.
In 1978 or 79, I found both. More than 20 years after reading The Sea Wolves, George, he'd literally been looking for information for what happened to his dad most of his life at this point. George contacted the National Archive in Washington, D.C., and obtained a microfilm copy of German war records, including the captain's log of the U-123.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fuck.
It took him like that long to just get that piece of information.
That's crazy.
Oh my God.
He says it was in German, but he could see the record of the ship having sunk and having been fired on, and there was even a map of like where it had gone down. So the log confirmed the story from the Sea Wolves that he read. U-123 encountered the Muskogee at 4:47 a.m. on March 22nd, 1942. She was roughly 600 miles off the coast of Virginia. So that's just also crazy.
That's only 600 miles out that close?
Yeah. She fired a single torpedo that struck the Muskogee, damaging her and sinking her in 16 minutes.
Shit.
UM tells us that Captain Reinhard Hartigan commanded the U-123 through most of the war and had sunk 23 Allied ships totaling 200,000 tons.
Oh my God.
He was personally congratulated by Adolf Hitler.
Ew.
And then I wrote...
Life goals.
Yeah, then they actually show on UM a video of him shaking hands with fucking Hitler. And I even like reversed and went back. It's him. It's him in the video. Stack says only 1 out of 10 U-boat personnel survived the war, and Hartigan was one of them. Jeez. So then UM tells us that George wrote to Hartigan and they agreed to meet in Canada. But they failed to mention that they wrote to each other for years before this ever happened. Wow. In 1986, George discovered that Hartigan was still alive and found his address in Germany. He wrote the letter to the former U-boat commander, the man who was responsible for the death of his father. Wow. George Betts says he thought, quote, "At long last, I thought, I'm now going to talk to this man. I had no animosity towards him. That's the way I felt. Here's one World War II veteran on one side and one World War II veteran on the other side. And in our cases, we were 2 of the lucky ones that survived the battles."
That kind of like devastation gives you so much clarity.
Mm-hmm. So then they have a scene of the 2 actually meeting on UM. They're both like dressed in suits and looking so cute. Oh, and I do want to say that if there was a movie about George Betts, John Malkovich would play him.
Okay.
Right?
Love it.
Love it.
So in a later interview with the Boston Sunday Globe, when asked what it was like to meet the man responsible for his father's death, Betts said, "I understood. I don't hate. We are both war veterans. It was his duty to sink our ships."
Oh my God.
In one of the letters Hartigan had written to Betts, he said, "I'm glad that you are not angry at me and you have the right idea, that all soldiers did their duty. The single persons were not our enemies, and when we sunk a ship, the sailors, etc., were comrades, and we tried to help them as much as we could."
Unless you let them sit on that board, those 7 guys on that board.
So, yeah, just him saying that was super interesting to me. It's just not how I think of war in my head. So it's just so much more complicated. And it's just interesting that he can be out there having killed thousands of men, and yet he wasn't like savagely trying to destroy life. Like he was, you know, it's so weird. In October of 1987, the 2 finally met, and of course, George wanted to know everything. Reinhard gave George an eyewitness report of the last moments of the Muskogee. Then UM has an interview with Reinhard, which I didn't expect. He says, in the morning of the 22nd of March in 1942, I saw steam and some masts, and then I tried to get in front of the course of the ship. The ship was zigzagging a little bit of nearly 15 degrees to every side. After nearly 2 hours, I was in a good position, and then I dived. So he was literally like stalking the ship for 2 hours.
Oh my God.
And then I shot a torpedo with my inaudible. This torpedo hit...
That's the name of your sex tape.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
This torpedo hit in the engine room of the tanker. Therefore, the tanker didn't burn, and she sank very quick. Like I said, 16 minutes.
So why?
I think because that was a large area, whereas like other areas were more cordoned off.
Okay, so it wasn't
was
compartmentalized.
A quick rush of water and a quick sink.
Wow, that's crazy.
And then it was all over, and it was too short for the crew to take lifeboats in the water, and therefore there were only 2 rafts. I gave the crew on the rafts food and water and cigarettes and told them their position. I thought over the next day a ship will find the rafts, and so it was very sad information for me to learn from George Betts that no one of the crew was rescued.
So he didn't know, so when they took that picture, they gave them stuff, and then they were like,
they wouldn't take them on the boat.
They couldn't take them.
And there's more reason.
Well, if they're on a sub, it makes sense, right?
I have something in here about there was like literally a reason they could not bring them with them.
Yeah, I could see if you're on a submarine.
Yeah, so I have a photo of the U-123 to show you guys from when it came back home. So when it came back home, all those little flags are the tonnage of all the ships they sunk. So
what?
This is William Betts' ship.
Oh my
7,034.
God.
Isn't that crazy?
Because that's what it's about. It's about taking out their resources.
Yep.
That's why he doesn't count it as individuals or people.
Yeah, it's literally
every one of those flags has like 1,000 number on it.
Yep, some of them are like 9. Yeah,
Holy
it's
shit.
insane. So here's another excerpt from one of the letters Hartigan had written to Betts. Quote, in the case of the Muskogee, I was not able to take the crew on board because we were westbound and had no room for so many people. I write this only to show you that the U-boat men were no devils, but normal men with human feelings, and we did all we could. We hoped they could succeed in reaching the coast or another ship, but the weather was bad, and it was bad for us all to let them alone with the wind and the sea.
Oh my God.
People are so fucked up.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't realize how common it was to actually take people on board if you could.
Well, yeah, you're supposed to. Like the
Yeah.
rules of engagement are you take prisoners of war. You don't leave people to die.
Yeah.
But when you're on a submarine, there's literally only so much air.
Yeah, so like thinking back to that photo of them like yelling toward the photographer.
They're like, please take us.
Yeah.
He told them their coordinates, but what are they supposed to do?
That
with
photo
that?
Yeah, they
is,
can't
like,
radio.
haunting.
Oh my God, I want to cry.
That
It's
photo
so
is
upsetting.
Yeah, I looked at it so many times. So after George found out what had happened to the, quote, lost Muskogee, he wanted to share his information with the other families affected by its disappearance because he is the truest sweetie.
Oh my gosh.
He was able to contact 8 of the families. In September of 1988, he drove over 200 miles to meet with the family of Clifford Chesley, who was the radio man of the Muskogee. Clifford was only 26 when he was lost at sea. There's this whole scene of George showing Clifford's family photos of the ship going down. Like, they literally never even knew what happened. So he was like, here's what happened.
They got a one-line telegram from a fucking shipping company.
Yeah. The Chesley family never knew what happened to him, so thanks to George, they had some closure after 46 years. Clifford's sister Viola Hayden said, we just assumed with either storm or something that the ship was missing. Raymond Chesley, his brother, said, up till now, we didn't even know actually if it went down. I mean, there are so many prisoners of war and MIAs now, it could have happened the same thing back then.
Wow.
Viola said there's just a little more peace there, finally knowing what really did happen. So Stack says, of the 7 men in the photo, 3 have been identified. They are third mate Nathaniel Foster, chief mate Morgan Finucane, and able-bodied seaman Anthony Sousa. The other 4 have never been identified, but they are among these 34 men who disappeared on board the Muskogee. Like so many brave men who served in the Merchant Marine, they died unheralded, unrecognized until now. And then UM rolls the names of all the men across the screen. After the broadcast, at least 12 families of the lost crewmen were able to get in contact with George and learned about his discovery.
Oh, that's awesome.
I don't know what it's called or when it happened, but National Geographic made a documentary about the story of the Muskogee and like George's journey of finding the information. But I can't find it anywhere. I can't even find the title of it. So I don't know if it's just super old. It must be. But because of the film, several more of the families reached out to George to like hear more about what he had. The other men in the photograph were later identified as Valentine Vincent Baker, second mate, Claude D. Blanchette, ordinary seaman, Thomas V. Donnellan, and Wiper Robert C. Oskin.
It would almost be worse to identify.
Yeah.
But it's like,
I wouldn't want to know if my family, if like my father and my grandfather like sat on that raft.
Right.
Or
I know.
if he was killed within 16 minutes. It's
know.
truly like, oh, what would you
I
choose?
don't know.
I was thinking about that.
know?
These poor men with like, he gave them a little food and like some cigarettes and like,
And
I
was-
just wonder like if at a certain point they were like,
We're
let's
gonna
be
die.
done now.
Yeah, we're gonna die. I don't know. And that's like such, I mean, there is no good way to die, but like, you know, you hear these stories about people who've been at sea for weeks and things like that, and like dying of dehydration and things
Yeah,
like that.
and I
It's,
feel like
the
being
worst way to
seamen,
go.
they would have known about that, so maybe they would just choose to just like, let's all get in the water. I don't know.
how do you do it? Like,
I
how do
know.
you stop your body from swimming?
How do you stop your body from
naturally?
surviving?
No.
Right.
So George Betts put all of his findings together into a collection of information. The George Betts collection consists of letters, photographs, clippings, maps, and other materials gathered in the course of his search for information about the fate of his father, William W. Betts. The photo that I showed you became the inspiration for the Merchant Marine Memorial at Battery Park, New York.
Oh,
Have you guys seen it? Okay, I'll show you a picture of it.
I might have seen it.
I don't know.
But I wouldn't have recognized it. I probably
Yeah.
walked right past it a billion
Yeah.
times. I've seen that.
Yeah, so this is
That's a great, yeah.
in honor of
I
them.
didn't realize
It's
that
very
was
sad.
that was what that was for.
Yeah.
Such a sad image with him kneeling on there. Oh God.
Pulling them out.
And it's interesting because it shows them like
Rescuing them,
Yeah.
which they didn't do.
commissioned by the American Merchant Mariners Memorial Incorporated. This memorial was conceived in 1976. In 1988, after an extensive competition, the artist Marisol Escobar was chosen to develop her design. Situated offshore of the north end of Battery Park and just south of Pier A, the monument stands on a rebuilt stone breakwater in the harbor. The work was dedicated on October 8, 1991. On a plaque at the memorial can be found these words: "Left to the perils of the sea, the survivors later perished." George has since passed away, of course. He was old in that episode. I couldn't find details on when he passed. Reinhardt passed away in 2018 at
What
the
the
age of
hell?
105.
Only the good die young.
Dude.
Wow, 105.
Yeah. So, and I do have the names of all 34 men, and I feel like we should put it somewhere.
We will. We could put it. We can literally list each one in the episode notes, honey. It's fine.
Yeah, I don't want to
Absolutely.
read it because it's very long, but
No, it's fine. We'll put each one in the episode notes.
yeah. So,
Wow, good job.
So-
That was
Wow.
really interesting.
That's so sad.
I know. I liked watching that one too.
yeah,
Like,
me too.
sometimes they're kind of boring, but that one was not boring.
Yeah.
And really interesting to see two people on two different sides.
I know. And then I have other cute pictures of them like at their meeting. Like they're just like jovial and like,
Yeah, like their ability to say no hard feelings.
And it's almost like if George hadn't been drafted and hadn't been a soldier who understood.
Yes.
Like, I wonder if he probably wouldn't feel the same way towards Reinhardt.
Totally.
He might not understand. That
yeah,
he has
yeah.
A duty
That's a
to
really
do.
good point.
Yeah, that kind of empathy I think is very difficult to create and have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I would not. I hate war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did a good
Wow.
job.
Nice work, girl.
What an epi.
God damn.
Seriously.
Okay, so Sharesy Feelsies, friends.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Because I know that you have a lot to share and feel. I just have one thing to recommend. It is the podcast Man in the Window, and it's produced by Wondery, and it is about the Golden State Killer. It gives a lot of information that we don't know already and some information that we do know, but there's a lot of firsthand interviews with police officers, Paul Holes.
How have I not heard anyone
I don't know
talk
how I
about
haven't
this?
either because you know this is my favorite.
I know. That's why I was excited to tell you about it. I don't know how I found it, but I pretty much love most of what Wondery does.
They're great.
Yeah.
I'm just surprised no other podcasts that I listen to have like done an ad for it.
Yeah.
Not even Wondery ones.
Yeah, and there's interviews with the victims. There's interviews with the
It's LA Times and Wondery.
Thank you, LA Times and Wondery.
Subscribing now.
Yeah, so I think there's like 6 episodes in or something, but there's interviews with Bonnie.
Wow. That's one thing I haven't seen anything on.
Yeah, me either. That's why I was like, and it starts with like a narrative about her. And I was like, okay, this is going to be good. So I absolutely recommend it if you're as obsessed with the Golden State Killer case as we are, or even if you're not really familiar with it. It gives an amazing background. It's a lot more interesting than listening to everybody else's podcasts about it, because it's the people that were actually involved with the investigation. And Paul Holes is seriously.
The 3-part from Case File is
Yes.
one of the best.
I mean, the 3-part from Case File, it was from before he was apprehended, and it is terrifying. But the call that he plays, they play the whole thing
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
on the Man in the Window.
Wow.
And it is like
Crazy.
so much longer than I had any idea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I knew
so
that
you
was
should
only a
definitely
snippet.
like give it a listen, because the woman who he called is talking while it's
Oh, really?
they interview her.
Oh my God, yes.
wow.
They interview the girl who was about to be raped, and then her dad showed up and he shot the dad.
yeah.
They interview her. There's a girl that was raped by him, and her family never brought it up again. So she had to just act like it never
Right.
happened for a year. I mean, there's just so many like sexual assault survivors, and then family members, and all of these people that were involved. So I think I just got to episode 5 or 6, and Paul Holes is now talking about like the bananas, like running the DNA on every little thing and falling into these rabbit holes and being convinced. And then, and the most important thing is like Paul Holes says, D'Angelo was my last suspect. He was a cop,
Yep.
so it took everybody just a really long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
I'm
it's super
so
good.
excited.
Yep.
I will absolutely listen.
Yeah.
Mine is, as we already said earlier, this is being recorded about 2 weeks before you're going to hear it, so it'll be a little belated, but Stranger Things 3.
Oh, it's so cute.
So good,
We
so
finished
cute.
it.
But also, like, everybody's a little bit older, so it's a little more sexy and a little more violent. It's like,
Ooh, it's
just like
gross.
amped up a little bit.
Yeah, they
a little more
really-
gory.
You can tell the Duffer Brothers had fun with like more of a horror
Yes.
element and gore.
And I just feel like the set design and the wardrobe were so good this season.
I
Like,
know.
It's
I
it's
want to
amazing.
I'm ready to rewatch season 1 and 2. I'm ready.
Yeah. So I'm not recommending it because obviously everyone already watches it, but it's just so good.
I mean, some people don't. I have friends that don't. I don't
I have friends that
understand.
don't too.
Well, I mean, you can feel about it. You don't have to share it.
Yeah. I just feel strongly.
Mine, I feel like I have so many because it's been a long time since we recorded, but
You've also been on a different continent, so.
that's true. I'll just say 2. One is a show that was recommended to me by when I was in England in this cottage. I made scones with this man who lived there. He was young and gay, and I had people there, so don't worry.
She's like, sadly, it wasn't my true dream.
Yeah.
Actually, that might be your true dream.
Yes, that's true. But he recommended to all of us because he's concerned about Brexit, and it's like really tumultuous over there as it is here. And he recommended to us this show called Years and Years, which is the BBC and HBO have made this show together. But it's set in the future, where it first starts out, Trump has been elected to another term.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
And then they've got like these terrible politicians who are running for parliament, and wars start breaking out. But then also technology is like advancing super fast. And it truly does like then skip forward another couple years and then another couple years. But it follows the same family through it all. Of adults, like adult children, and then their kids and their relationships. It's really good. I would recommend it. And then my other thing was I got home and I was like bored of my house because I stayed in so many cute places in Europe. So I just started painting shit. And so I'm painting my bathroom. I painted my front door a different color.
I didn't notice.
It used to be. It used to be red, now it's yellow.
I've been wanting to paint this door for a year.
Do it. It's so easy.
I know. I need to do it.
They always say that if you are getting like a feeling that you want to update the exterior of your house and you don't have any money, just paint your fucking door. Just paint it a crazy color.
So I
mine
painted
is like
it.
chipped and gross and weird.
It's so easy, just paint it. But then I also painted 2 doors in my house, or 3 doors in my house. 2 of them are a pink, like a light peachy pink, cottagey look, both sides. And then I painted my laundry room door, which like you can see from all the way across the house, like a very light mint green.
Yeah, girl, paint those doors.
And I didn't have to paint a wall, and it made a huge difference.
That's fun.
It's so fun and so easy. Like a quart of paint covered both the doors.
Yeah.
I used just a sample for the one side of the door I painted. It's so cheap and like a full makeover. Anyway, I recommend it. Paint a door.
Paint a door.
Paint a door.
Yeah, you know what? I fully support that. It's an easy way to like feel like you're living in a different spot and give you like a different perspective on your place.
I need to paint a lot of things.
Yeah, it's so fun.
But you don't have to. You can just paint a door.
Just start with a door. Okay, so
I love you.
Isn't this an interesting Sharesy? I painted. It's literally like
I think it's
listen to me talk about paint drying. Guys, it only took me 1 quart for these 2 doors, both sides. 2. So before we talk about next episode, guys, next episode is our season finale. That episode will be out in 2 weeks, but after that episode, we're going to take the month of August off.
Don't be mad.
Don't be mad. Don't be mad. If you're a patron, and if you're not, now's a great time to subscribe. If you are a patron, you will still get 2 episodes per month. We're not taking a break from you.
We'll never take a break from you.
Never. Just want to let you know, it's like basically 2 episodes. We'll tell you when we're coming back on the season finale.
It's breaking my heart as much as it's breaking yours.
It's not breaking my heart.
I know. I said my heart. I know it's not breaking yours.
It's literally a 2-episode break for us.
Yeah. But a lot of work break for us.
Being that we're bi-weekly, it's a little bit.
Yeah. But thanks for hanging with us. So then on our season finale episode 24.
Holy smokes.
Can you believe?
Congratulations. Let's all self-congratulate for a minute that we've done this for as long as we have.
Pat, 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 pat.
Only 11 seasons left, ladies. I can't wait to be in my fucking 50s and doing this.
We'll just roll right into our Social Security.
Guys, we're really going to need your Patreon.
Patreon.
This is our retirement plan. So
Oh, no.
Help us.
The millennial retirement plan is just podcasting.
Yeah.
Or Gen X, whatever.
So,
It's a treasure for you, honey bunny.
Okay. So I think that maybe it wasn't originally a treasure for me, but after the last treasure escapade and someone being like, you get the next treasure segment, I realized that I don't think that I've had to deal with a treasure segment.
You haven't. And you kind of like a treasure.
Fucking love a treasure. I also gave myself like 3 treasure segments next season just to make up for the fucking treasure.
Oh, I hate them.
Well,
so
we'll
take 'em.
see.
You guys
Maybe we can
have
do
the
a good
treasures.
old-fashioned swapsies.
Well, it depends on the one. You're right. Some are stinkers.
So I have a treasure segment. I have no idea what to expect. So that means we'll be here for 16 hours. It's the story of Babe and Doc Noss. Mm-hmm. Noss?
Love it. Babe and Doc Noss.
Babe and Doc Noss.
All right, and I have Carrie Lynn Nixon, who goes missing.
And I have
The unexplained death of Dexter Stefanik.
The unexplained death of Dexter Stefanik.
There we go. Together, that will make a sentence.
That's what I have.
Go to patreon.com/Resolve Mysteries Podcast if you're interested in supporting us there. Again, it's our retirement. It really helps us out. To see other ways to support the show, you can go to resolvemysteries.com/support or resolvemysteriespod.threadless.com to support some merch.
Yeah.
Send us your stories for listener short stack episodes. If you want to email us your favorite unsolved mystery story, cold case, nostalgia, anything you want, go to resolvemysteriespodcast.com. Our email is resolvemysteriespodcast@gmail.com. We just got some mail in our P.O. box that we opened mid-recording and all squealed in excitement. We'll tell you about those on our next listener short stack.
It's the best mail, I think.
It's really sweet.
And it's like one of them was something that could have been in an email, and because it was a letter, it's like so special.
It was a handwritten
100% gonna put that on the wall.
Totally. So our P.O. Box is another place you can send anything to us, 14005 Portland, Oregon 97293. Instagram at @re_solve mysteries, Twitter and Facebook at Resolve the Pod. Subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, and if you like us, tell a friend. We love you so much. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye. Strychnine poisoning is considered an unusually cruel way to die.
Probably similar to, what's it called? Have you listened to
She's telling a secret to Allison. I can't hear it. It's from across the table.
Cyanide?
Yes.
Similar, probably.
Wasn't that mercury poisoning, S-Town? That was mercury poisoning.
They're trying not to spoil it for me.
She hasn't listened.
Oh, fuck. That was years ago, girl.
No.
I know. Statute of limitations on listening.
He slowly had mercury, which was making him crazy, but then he took
They're so good at being sneaky, it's not even funny.
Anyway, don't you think it's probably similar? Remember his friend talked about him being on the phone?
No, it's worse. So, in answer to Eliza's elaborate question,
Wow.
strychnine poisoning is actually worse than cyanide poisoning. Yes. So, Jesus Christ, we took a roundabout route.
Sometimes I can't remember the names of things.
I know.